So, brother Chief Avdil, first of all, which is my friend, my brother for many years, over 20 years. I thank you for joining us here today over the controversy of the controversy of all controversies, who is the Messiah. So over the past few weeks or so, couple of weeks, you've been making some posts about the Messiah and whether or not you're Messianic now, or you follow the concept of a Messiah. Now, in the Old Testament community, we usually don't ascribe to the concept of a Messiah, right? We understand that there is someone that's going to be anointed, that's going to sit on the throne of Melech Dawid, that the Most High God will appoint, one of the sons or the descendants of David or the descendants of Jesse. But the term Messianic is more so used by Christians or brothers and sisters who come from the New Testament point of view. It's usually not used by Israelites who are what they call, quote unquote, Old Testament only, right? Torah-based Israelites, Tanakh-based Israelites. Is usually not used by those Israelites. So, first of all, what is the meaning of the word Messianic?
Okay, so first and foremost, giving all honor and praise to the Creator, the Holy One of Israel, the God of our ancient forefathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Giving respect to my brother Chief Uzael for opening up his studios early this afternoon, and allowing us to come together to deal with a very serious topic. Now, I recently came out and said publicly that I no longer consider myself non-messianic, that I would prefer to use the term messianic right now and in the future. So first and foremost, to answer your question, I would say that the term Messianic would literally mean in English of the Messiah. Those who believe that a Messiah who is an anointed individual who is empowered by the Creator or by the Holy Spirit to revolutionize the universe, to revolutionize the world, to gather in the exiles of the lost tribes of Israel, to rebuild the third temple, as well as to judge the nations. These are some very important and defining criteria associated with the Mashiach or the Messiah. So when I call myself a Messianic Israelite, I first and foremost am identifying with the fact that I acknowledge that there is an anointed leader to come. But the community that I come from, the school of thought that I come from, always believed that there is an anointed leader that is to come. We just refrain from using the term Messianic because it is of how it is used in the secular world. Messianic in the secular world would mean that you believe in Yeshua or Jesus as the Messiah. So the community that we come from, we purposely refrain from calling ourselves Messianic because of the fact that it is labeled as being a Christian, so to speak, or having New Testament views, for lack of a better term. What I'm saying, and what I'm going to be proposing in this video, throughout the duration of the video, is that when you get into the oral tradition of the Torah, the sages of the Torah, those great, giant, mountain-like teachers of Torah, taught about salvation, taught about Torah practice, Torah learning, and several things that they taught in my research I believe to be very much aligned with the New Testament's model of salvation, with the New Testament's model of the Mashiach. So it's with that thought in mind that I will now begin to call myself a Messianic, because I agree with the model of the Mashiach as told by the oral tradition which the New Testament tries its best to echo and emulate. What I want all communities to understand, but especially my community, is that for me to do this is a point of contention, number one, from the community that I come from. The community that I come from, we taught against anything in the New Testament holding any weight with regard to who the Messiah is. Is the Messiah supposed to suffer? Is the Messiah supposed to be rejected? Is the Mashiach or the Messiah supposed to go through a series of trials and tribulations? And or the ultimate, is the Mashiach to be killed? Or in the language of the New Testament, is he to be sacrificed? And I've uncovered some research that not only suggests, but actually shows that the oral tradition which precedes the New Testament writers, which precedes the New Testament personalities, actually has the exact same model of the Mashiach as does the New Testament. We actually have a line of questions that were drawn up today that we're going to be looking at verbatim so as to really get into the heart of the topic. But for lack of a better way of explaining it, I would simply say, today I call myself a Messianic because today I have the courage to go on record to say that I agree with the oral tradition's rendition of who the Mashiach is versus the traditional rendition of the Messiah as I was brought up and trained to believe in the school of thought in the community that I come from. What this does is it separates my views from the community that I come from. I want to be very clear on that. The first thing that should immediately be clear is the fact that I'm using the term oral tradition. That automatically separates me from the community that I spent over 20 years in. So I want to make it very clear that the views that I'm sharing are my views. And they are views of a select number of Israelites scattered in the community, but nonetheless, we are not the majority. And my brother to the right of me, Chief Uzael, and many in the community that I come from may not necessarily share those views. But in order to have objective insight shared, sometimes a platform is open for a person that we respect their views to come and bring in or introduce views that may be challenging to the community, because the school of thought that I come from always taught me and always taught us that we cannot become great unless we challenge ourselves. And the one thing that I'm going to tell you is that the ideas that I'm going to share today is going to challenge all communities on a major level, and challenge in the sense that I'm not attacking any one community, but challenge in the sense that I'm bringing out information that I don't believe was ever brought out before, that I do believe would harmonize all communities and cause a greater deal of understanding on the topic that we're dealing with.
Great. I think if I just finished hearing you said that the concept of the Messiah that you're following, or what you're speaking about, is about what the oral tradition says. Right. And you believe that the New Testament model comes from the oral tradition.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact.
Are you saying that the entire New Testament model comes from the oral tradition, or certain parts?
Well, certain parts, certainly.
Okay.
Certain parts of the New Testament, namely the New Testament's narrative on the role of the Mashiach, on the role of the Messiah, is actually born out of the oral tradition, which precedes the New Testament by 300 to 400 years. In other words, there were sages and rabbis of, quote-unquote, the Old Testament period, way before the New Testament was codified, way before any New Testament personality existed or lived, including Yeshua or Jesus. The rabbis or the sages of the oral tradition that precede them by no less than 200 to 300 years are on record saying some of the exact same things that we find in the New Testament theme concerning the Mashiach. such as the idea of the Mashiach supposed to suffer. The community that I come from, we taught, and it was taught to me, it was taught to us, that the suffering servant of Isaiah 53 represented the nation of Israel collectively. And that the nation of Israel collectively went through a series of trials and tribulations, and literally, because of their wickedness and their unwillingness to practice Torah, they went into captivity, they were punished, and as a result, they even borne the burden of the sin and iniquities of the nations. Because as Isaiah 53 so eloquently points out, the Mashiach in question is bearing the iniquity of the nations. We've always interpreted this as the children of Israel. So one thing that I would like to point out just exegetically is that I think that the community that I hail from, even within the framework of how we approach the Messianic role, I think there's an element that we may have skipped over and missed within our own argument. When we say Isaiah 53 is speaking of the children of Israel, that's perfectly fine if that is what we believe, if that is what we can see from the text. But once you go on record saying that, you have to also acknowledge that the end result is still true. Whoever the Mashiach is, whether you're saying it's Israel collectively as a nation or one man collectively as a nation, Isaiah 53 is saying that this person is bearing the iniquities of the nations. So in concept, this means that the writer, Isaiah, is not against the idea of someone bearing iniquities. That's a very important point. I'm going to develop the point later on in the questioning with proof texts in the Torah to show. Now, the first thing I want to say to be objective is that we can look at texts such as Ezekiel 33, which will tell us, no man shall die for the sins of another, which, believe you me, as a sharp, avid student of Torah and the oral tradition, I perfectly understand that no man can die for the iniquity of another person. And I still believe that, and I've never changed that. What I do understand is that the death of a righteous person can trigger repentance in the heart and minds of those who are witness to the death of this righteous individual. I believe that there are several examples in the Torah of which I'll spend the duration of this dialogue pointing out that shows you how the death of someone righteous can trigger repentance and atonement from those in that generation who are witness to that death. But that death does not annul the iniquity of those individuals. That death does not serve as a sacrifice in place of the righteousness of those individuals. But that death, seeing that the Creator takes a righteous person from the land of the living, so to speak, removes them from life and introduces them to death, those of us who can't even tie their shoes, who have some common sense left or some righteousness left, a thought may appear in our mind and say, if the Creator took him out, and I know I can't even tie his shoe, I better get it together. So what the New Testament, I believe, does is the writers of the New Testament now develop on this idea and they take it to the extreme. They do something that not even the oral tradition teaches. The oral tradition teaches that the death of the righteous can, in fact, trigger repentance and eventual atonement in a collective body of people or an individual. It can trigger it, but it does not take the place of that person's righteousness or that person's merit becoming the chief agent in that person attaining or achieving salvation. To break it down a little bit more clear and to be a little bit more transparent, I want to say this. We read about in the book of Numbers, I believe it's Hukot or Numbers 20, right? Where we read about the Parah Aduma, the red heifer. And as we're reading about the red heifer, immediately after the story of the red heifer is introduced, we see the death of Miriam being introduced in the text immediately after the text describes the red heifer. Commenting on that, the sages say this: we have to understand that when two separate thoughts are being shared in the text, exegetically, there's a connection. What do I mean by exegetically there's a connection? We have to understand that for Torah scholars and for Torah teachers, there are and has always been a series of methods involved or employed in analyzing the text. There's a method known as homiletic interpretation. There's obvious methods known as exegetical interpretation. There's even deeper messages known as esoteric interpretations. Nonetheless, there are various ways that Torah scholars and Torah teachers, or teachers in general of any sacred text, go into a particular text to extrapolate and extract various truths. Homiletically speaking, or exegetically speaking, there is a term known as juxtaposition. Let me repeat myself. There's a terminology when studying a sacred text that is known as juxtaposition. It is spelled Juxta and the word position. Juxtaposition. Juxtaposition literally means when you take two separate passages and one follows the other. So when we're talking about the para aduma, the red heifer, and the death of Miriam, the sages automatically point out what is the significance of the juxtaposition of these two stories. We know that the red heifer atones. The red heifer atones for anyone who comes in contact with a dead body. Right. And we know that the death of Miriam, who, by the way, the only instance of Torah where we ever find Miriam doing anything wrong is when Miriam challenged Moshe. Other than that, we find nothing wrong with her. So I think it's beyond safe to say that Miriam is a righteous individual within the Torah and the Tanakh. In fact, the proverb says that a righteous individual can fall 7 times and yet rise. We only know Miriam slipping up once. The great mind of King Solomon says the righteous can fall up to 7 times and still yet rise again. Miriam only messed up once as far as we know. Therefore, I think it's very safe to say that she's righteous. Immediately after Miriam's death, the Torah goes on to say this as well. The cloud of glory that accompanied us in the wilderness, the wells that accompanied us in the wilderness were automatically dried up. So what do the sages say? It was in Miriam's merit that we attained water from the wells. In other words, immediately after her death, we see the wells are dried up. Right. So the sages comment and they say the reason for this is that it was in Miriam's merit that we even merited that water, that we even received that water. Now, of course, there's going to be deep sea divers in terms of academia and knowledge who are going to say it's in God's merit. God controls it all. Yes, we understand that. But we also have to understand that great men and women of the scripture in the world, living and existing, several things that occur in the world occur at times on behest or on behalf of an individual's righteousness. For instance, the world continued and did not end for the sake of the righteousness of Noah. Mm-hmm. That's a fact for those who at least acknowledge scripture. So saying all this to say, the concept of the death of the righteous being a trigger for atonement and repentance is not something foreign to the Old Testament worldview or the rabbinic or oral traditions worldview. And this for me is very, very important, because when I say that the community that I come from didn't teach these things, I want to make something clear. It's not to attack the community that I come from. And it's not even to suggest that what I'm bringing out makes me right and makes them wrong. But we're here to share ideas, and I believe that is what I have the opportunity to do here today. So the community that I came from, the school of thought that I came from, taught that the New Testament, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm saying anything wrong, Chief Uzael, the New Testament is as fake as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Right or wrong?
Absolutely.
That's what we were taught. The New Testament is as fake as any Aesop or fable that you would read in any Greco-Roman story. Correct? Right or wrong? Okay. So the school of thought that I came from, the community that I come from, taught that the New Testament's model of the Mashiach is not only foreign to the Old Testament worldview, but in fact, it is as fictitious as the Greco-Roman fables and mythology. Something that my research has led me to challenge today.
But also, to be fair, the community we come from teaches that every lie has some truth in it.
That's a fact.
Right? That we do teach that. I believe that I believe where it might, and I'm going to go back to the line of questioning, but I believe where you have where some problems might come in is trying to reconcile things like a virgin birth, someone, and I'm not sure if that's what you're implying, all these things.
No.
The virgin birth, or a man being born of a ghost and a
right.
and a woman, things like him being this Messiah being dying for the sins of the world.
Okay.
Right? And I know you just went into a whole explanation about triggering someone's how did you put it? When someone dies, it could trigger some sort of righteousness or for people to react in a certain way or to be a certain way. But I think where the controversy and the things that you're saying right now, where it might get you a little bit into not trouble, because we're grown men and we all have the right to feel how we want to feel, but where you might get a little pushback is as far as connecting the New Testament with old how do you say it, Talmudic or oral traditions, right? Which a lot of people in our community do not accept either.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
They'll say, if it's not Torah, it ain't us.
That's
so
right.
Even if you saying it's oral traditions or it's this, we don't care. So it's all crap. Put it all in a ball and throw it in the garbage.
That's
you know what I mean? Because those are man's opinions. It's not the law of God, right? So I think that's where some of your pushback might come from our community. You know what I mean? And what you're revealing. But we're here to reveal certain things, and you're going to make your presentation. And I'm going to ask you this next question. As a student of the Old Testament, you came from a school which rejected resurrection, which is a major component of New Testament theology. What are your thoughts on resurrection?
Excellent question. And the timing is perfect because
a physical resurrection.
A physical resurrection.
Right.
The timing is perfect because you just pointed out that many of the sources that I pointed out for why the way that the text of the Old Testament may be interpreted to be a model of the New Testament, the source of the model of the New Testament is based in oral tradition, which me and you both acknowledge a great majority, if not all, of our community does not accept the oral tradition.
Right.
And I have to first and foremost agree that you are absolutely right. There are very, very few people in the community that we come from that accept the oral tradition. If I was to weight on a scale or to use an estimation, I would want to say 98% of the people in our community reject the oral Torah. Would that be fair?
99.9%.
99.
I'm just like 98%.
You're right. Because we want to be honest.
Right.
So a great majority. So in saying
and you know what? 90%. Because if we talk about what we call quote unquote black Jews, that will be part of our community.
Right.
So they do accept,
right.
which they do accept. Some of them do accept the oral tradition.
Right. Which is definitely what I'm including because the community that I come from is born out of the oldest community in at least here in New York City, which is the Rabbi Matthew's community.
Right.
A lot of people may not be aware, but Rabbi Matthew taught within the framework of the oral Torah.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I could go on to say a little bit more about what's contemporary in the community, but so as to not bring about any confusion, I'm not going to do that necessarily at this moment. But I would want to say that there's at least 2% in this community that does accept the oral tradition. And Chief Uzziel pointed out something that's absolutely accurate. The community that I come from does not. But here's the thing. Years ago, the school of thought that I came from taught that the way we were viewed by Messianics, meaning Israelites who accept the New Testament and accept Yeshua, Yahushua, or maybe even Jesus as the Messiah, they viewed us as Pharisees. Something that all of us used to echo and say in our teachings. In fact, sometimes as we were teaching, we would get up and say, yeah, we the Pharisees that they would talk about, right or wrong, right? But the beautiful thing about studying is that you grow. So as we study, and I come across the concept of Pharisees and the origin, and I begin to dig deep in it, I say, wait, we don't even fit that. Because the term Pharisee, which is going to lead me to deal with resurrection, right. The term Pharisee comes from the Hebrew word perushim, and it means those who abstain, or those who restrict themselves. And these were your individuals with extreme moral character and extreme moral fiber, but more importantly, extreme Torah learning. We know that the way that the Tanakh was codified was by rabbis, not of the non-oral tradition, but of the oral tradition. Mm-hmm. We know that all of the vowels that we see in our Tanakh comes from the oral tradition. The vowel in the text is what allows us to read the text. So simply seeing, we can't even have an accurate way of reading the text without accepting this part of the oral tradition, which is where to place the vowels, which is known as the Masoretic text. So like it or not, we already accept parts of the oral tradition. So in examining the Pharisees, I found something very significant. One of the things that the Pharisees accepted was resurrection. I said, wow, because coming from an Old Testament only community, resurrection is something that we frowned upon and said, no, that's that New Testament book. The tradition that we come from, when you die, that's it. You don't come back. Nothing else occurs. When you dead in today's language. When we repeat something, that makes it real, right? So when you die, you dead. And the Pharisees didn't agree with that. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection of a person's soul, their consciousness, as well as resurrection of the physical body, which was different from the Greco-Roman world, who also believed in resurrection, but the Greco-Roman world only believed in resurrection of the soul. They did not believe in resurrection of the body. So in fact, if you look at the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, for those who come from the Messianic community, those who hail from the Messianic community, one of the first gospel books written was the book of Mark. In the book of Mark, Jesus or Yeshua's resurrection is described as being spiritual. No one saw him. The later Gospels, now you begin to actually see him. Why is this? That's something I'm going to tackle a little later in the dialogue. But resurrection of the soul only is a Greco-Roman concept. Resurrection of the soul and body is a concept born in the oral tradition of the Torah. And by oral tradition, I mean it is not readily seen in the text. It's something that we extrapolate based on context within the text. So let me go on to say this. Seeing that we're talking about Pharisees and resurrection, we have to address the other schools of thought in existence during the time of this terminology. There are mainly 4 schools of thought within the framework of a time period, or the initial time period where the term Pharisee is being used. The other school of thought is the Sadducees, which is like a Greek or Latin term, because the Hebrew would be Zadokim, which are the righteous ones. And here's the thing about the Sadducees, or the Zadokim, the righteous one. We have no record of them in the Old Testament whatsoever. In the New Testament, the Sadducees are considered wicked. But their very name literally is the polar opposite. They call themselves Zadukim, the righteous ones. But in the New Testament, they're portrayed as being wicked. But here's the thing about the Sadducees or the Zadukim, their worldview. They only accepted a literal meaning or contextual understanding of the Torah. So anything that escapes what the literal text said, the Sadducees would say, you're a heretic. So the Sadducees or the Zadukim, the Sadducees, considered the Pharisees to be heretics. Because the Pharisees says, we can't understand the text unless we delve into those teachings that Moses passed down to the 70 elders, the 70 elders passed down to Joshua, and that Joshua passed down to every consecutive Torah scholar from Moshe to present day. The Sadducees totally disagree. The Sadducees in today's language would be called Karaites, coming from the Hebrew word kara, which means to read. So if it's not something that I could actually open the book and literally read, then it doesn't exist. So I want to make a point now. In the community that I come from, we say that we're Pharisees, and I have to say, with more study, that is no longer okay for us to say or think is true. The community that I come from would more than likely align with what is called the Sadducees, regardless of the New Testament's view of them as wicked people. And of course, the New Testament worldview would, number one, see them as wicked because they rejected the messiahship of Yeshua, just like the community that I come from rejected the messiahship of Yeshua. So when I say that the community that I come from would be more than likely aligned with Sadducees, I hope no one in the community that I come from believes I'm insulting them. Because if you follow what I'm saying, the Sadducees or the Zadukim only accepted what the text said, or we could read and see the text saying. If the text doesn't say it, it doesn't occur.
But to be fair, I think that the Pharisee statement was more in jest, tongue-in-cheek, because of the Messianic brothers calling us Pharisees. Right? So it was more tongue-in-cheek. Oh, we the Pharisees.
Right.
It wasn't so much saying that we were Pharisees, but it was more tongue-in-cheek. Like, well, we'll be what you want us to be, but we just not accepting, the New Testament. Right.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing about dialogues like this is that we shouldn't be afraid of knowledge. We shouldn't be afraid of new information. New information and knowledge causes us to evolve spiritually and intellectually. So it was okay for us in ignorance of full terminologies to make these statements. But to come into knowledge of these statements, we must understand that to continue would be voluntary ignorance. To continue calling ourselves Pharisees, coming from the community that we come from, now we're volunteering ignorance because now there's a record of a correction. And the correction can be verified easily by looking at these different schools of thought, seeing how they saw themselves and how others saw them, and being able to come to these truths. So the other school of thought, and I'm going to finally get to resurrection. The other school of thought is the Essenes. Now, I have a long pause on this particular school of thought because the Essenes are a very, very adept community. And by very, very adept community, I mean that the Essenes are considered in today's language initiates. And in today's language, they are considered the mystical ones or the mystic individuals. Now, we know that some of the oldest Torah scrolls were found in the Qumran cave. And we know in the Qumran cave, we're talking about obviously now the Dead Sea Scrolls, the majority of the literature that we uncover is literature from the Essenes. So we know that essentially when we're looking at that which is treasured and housed in the Qumran community, we know that this is an Essene community. number one. And number two, the term Essene, again, is not a Hebrew word. It's also not even a Greek word. It's actually an Aramaic word. Essene comes from the Aramaic word Asiya, which means the healers. These were considered the original Essenes, or the original Asiyam or Asiyim, were considered offshoots or descendants of the Levitical priests, the Levitical tribes. So when we look at or we examine the community of the Essenes, they were mainly a Levite community. Hence why many of the rituals that they record, the mystic nature of it was because they belonged to the priestly class of Israel. Now, what I want to say is that from a historical point of view, those who study the literature within the New Testament, namely the literature where Yeshua or Jesus is speaking, automatically he is identified with hailing from this community because of his worldview. So I'm saying that to say, I'm now talking to the Messianic or the New Testament community. Sometimes when I introduce myself in the community and I say to people that I don't have a problem saying that some of my modes of interpretation, some of my methods of interpretation are esoteric, or what will be called mystic. I don't even have a problem with being labeled or called a mystic, although others think that that's an insult. I'm actually complimented by it because I understand that everything is not literal, especially when we're dealing with a sacred text. And there are clearly certain things that you have to dig into the heart of the text or the context of the text in order for you to understand and discern. So I'm saying that to say to my New Testament or Messianic brothers, the term initiate, the term mystic shouldn't be a term that bothers you or is laughable to you when the chief figure in the New Testament, Yeshua, is purported to come from this community. And many of the things that he taught echoed their teachings. In fact, when you go into the book of Revelations, if you're familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but in particular the scrolls that deal with the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Now I'm speaking to those who are familiar with the Dead Sea Scroll literatures. When you get into the scrolls that deal with the sons of light in the Dead Sea Scrolls literature, and you examine within context the teachings of Yeshua, you perfectly understand that it was possible that if he was a historical individual, that this is the school of thought he would have followed. Now, the question you asked me, which I'm finally getting to, but I felt like I had to define these terms first before I get there, is resurrection is the underpinning theme of the New Testament with regard to Yeshua. Because although resurrection is mentioned with other individuals or personalities in the New Testament, he is the chief figure associated with this concept.
Right.
So what are my thoughts on resurrection? Well, here are my thoughts on resurrection, first and foremost, from the perspective of the Torah. Let me do something that is bold and even courageous, but also could cause me to even be, cut off respect-wise from my community. I want to first go on record to say I don't have a problem with the idea of resurrection. I personally don't have a problem with the concept of resurrection. In fact, I think that the Torah has hints and allusions to it, and I will give my exegesis on that right now. The community that I come from, the school of thought that I come from, taught that resurrection is fictitious. This whole concept does not exist. Once you die, you're dead. But the school of thought that I come from, when we would go into the book of Malachi and we would read about Eliyahu, who we know died or was taken up, and he is purported to come back at some future time. Now, we don't just study Torah, we also study arithmetic, natural sciences, and a whole host of other areas of academia. So we're now dealing with common sense. if Eliyahu or Elijah is living in a particular time period, and let's say between 9 and 700 BCE, to be fair, right? And the Torah is telling you he was taken up into Shemayim, the heavens, and that he will return at some future later time, which may be a millennia or so later. I have to tell you by proxy, whether you admit it or not, you're already giving into the concept of resurrection. Because we know from the basis of natural science, what man is living 1,000 years straight? Especially after the flood of Noah. Because we do have examples of that. Every single ancient civilization has examples of men living extraordinary years. But this was all pre-flood. Post-flood, man's years are 70 to 80, 90 at best. Some climbed up to 100 as we still see today. But from that point on, we're only promised 70. In order for us in the Old Testament community, so to speak, to accept that Eliyahu is coming back, and we also understand how natural science works, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit it or not, you are already by proxy giving into the idea of resurrection, because clearly if this man was taken up and this man is purported to come back, and it's been at least 2,000 years, matter of fact, in his case, it's been 2,000 years since the era of Yeshua. But we're talking about Elijah, which at earliest we're talking 9 to 800 BC, so that's another millennium. Elijah has been gone now over 3,000 years. We know how natural science works. I haven't met a man yet that's 3,000 years old. So if we believe that Eliyahu is coming back, we already accept resurrection. But to be fair and objective, which is I believe I have a reputation for doing, I'll say this. Not everyone in my community believes that Elijah is coming back in physical form. There are many in my community that believe that Eliyahu will reappear in spirit, which is, I have no problem agreeing or disagreeing to either. But to be fair and objective, I'm bringing these thoughts out to show that there is a concept of resurrection within the text of the Old Testament if we would simply focus on some of the things we're saying and the implications of it. If we agree and believe that Eliyahu is going to return, those who believe he's going to return in the physical, because if you believe he's going to return in the spiritual, then there's no argument that I have for you. But there are definitely some of us in my community that believe that he's coming back in the physical. And if you believe that he's coming back in the physical, then I have to say that yes, that is a form of resurrection. To develop the point even further, I'm now going to move on to the story of Elisha. The Torah tells us that the family that took in Elisha the prophet, their son died. Mot, death, according to the Torah. There was no life. That means that if we were in a hospital setting, there was nothing to read. You flatlined, period. We can't bring back, and I'm a former EMT, so I can tell you that in a hospital setting, you don't bring back a flat line. At least you're not asked to or expected to. At that point, all medical intervention is supposed to stop once a person flatlines. So this person met medical and even by the Torah's definition, death. But the Torah says through various prophetic methodologies, the prophet stretched out his entire body over the body of this dead boy. And this dead boy was brought back to life. By proxy, again, I have to tell you that no matter how temporary it was, meaning at best, some people would say, yeah, but he was probably only dead like 30 minutes. And if we look in today's language, sometimes even in the realm of science, a person will be said to be dead on a hospital table and then they come back. So explain that, Ak. The only difference is the story that's recorded in the Torah is told by individuals inspired by God. And if they say he died, then guess what? He was dead. There was no line. You see, in a hospital and the machines that are employed, yeah, there's going to be a percentage of we don't know. So yes, there are several examples in a hospital setting of a person purported to be dead and they're really not dead because our machine didn't detect it. When we go into our sacred text, which we call the Torah, the Old Testament, and the text is telling us the person is dead, I don't believe God made a mistake. I think God knew that the person was dead. And God says that Elisha brought him back. Like it or not, by proxy, that is resurrection. Moving on, and I think this is a controversial. I don't think my other two examples were controversial based on my explanation, but I think that my next example is a bit controversial. And it's my last example. My last example is a proof text for resurrection in the Tanakh or the Torah. Is there's a point in time in the scripture. I believe it's in the Minor Prophets, and I could be wrong because I'm not a computer like some people think. I don't remember everything, but it's in there. And as I say it, you're going to understand what I'm saying. And you'll be able to point out the scripture. So I'm glad I'm saying it like this because as I'm saying it, if you know the scripture, please type it in the live stream so that people can see it and read it for themselves. There's a time period in the nation of Israel's history where the nation is so beat down and trodden that in comes the prophet and says this: a voice is heard on high, Rachel weeping for her children. Now, because I own about 10 different translations of Torah, I can be objective and honest to tell you that text is translated different ways. And I'm going to take you through some of the different translations. One translation will say, a voice is heard in Ramah, which in Hebrew would mean on high. But in the translation, it would literally say on Ramah, which would make it a designation, a physical designation on earth. So a verse is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. So let me deal with that first, and before coming back to what I believe it truly is. Let's say the interpretation that a voice is heard in Ramah is correct. That Ramah is a physical place on earth, and we're not speaking about on high or i.e. in the heavens. Like Rachel is somewhere in the heavens crying. Let's say that that's not the case. Let's say the case is Ramah is a junction or a precinct or a district or a vicinity within the land of Israel. And a voice is heard there. We're still left with what I would call, to use today's language, the elephant in the room. It says Rachel is weeping. Whether we believe Ramah is a physical district, city, or vicinity here on earth, the elephant still has not left the room. It said Rachel is weeping for her children. Only one Rachel we know of in the Torah and the Tanakh, and that's Rachel Eshet Yisrael, or another name for Yaakov, Jacob. The text literally says Rachel is weeping. So whether we believe that Ramah is a physical place, or you may agree with me that the text is pointing out something that we normally don't encounter, because I'm interpreting Ramah as a voice is heard on high, and the reason why I'm interpreting it as a voice is heard on high because of who's speaking. I would be quick, or I would be effervescent to agree or be moved to decide that Ramah is a physical place on earth had it not been recorded that Rachel is speaking. But because I know Rachel been dead for years, then now I'm believed to interpret Ramah as it is interpreted in Hebrew to mean on high. A voice is heard on high. Rachel weeping for her children. So now this sounds crazy, Avdiel Ben Levi, or Zion Lexx, as some of y'all know me. You mean to tell me, we thought you were smart, brother. Here I'm playing devil's advocate. You mean to tell me, brother, we thought of you as a smart brother. But you mean to tell me that with all your years of learning, I've heard you say you have 20-something years in the Torah and the Tanakh, that you honestly sit here and tell us that you believe that our matriarch Rachel was heard on high, weeping for her children. And you believe that that's Rachel, as in Rachel that been dead over, maybe 1,000 years now. That's what you believe? I say yes. As example, I'll give this point. We encounter a story, and in the book of Shemuel or Samuel, where Saul decides to himself that God's word from the mouth of his prophets is not sufficient for his belief. That he needs to go to what he believes would be a more accurate source. He's going to go visit an Obeah woman, which we call in English the Witch of Endor, right? But in the text of the Tanakh, she's literally said to practice Ob, which is where we get the modern term Obeah from. So that's a teaching within itself. And being that I come from the Caribbean, at least my parents, I was born here to both Caribbean parents, I know and understand what Obeah is. And in Obeah, a person, and it's mainly women, acts as a medium for a deceased spirit or soul. And they conjure or use whatever methods that they use in order to become a medium or a conduit for a deceased soul to come and speak a message through them. Now, when Saul goes to visit the Witch of Endor, he asks for Shemuel the prophet to arise. And the Tanakh says, Shemuel the prophet arose and says, "Why have you woke me up from my rest?" Now I have to say this, because this has been, and Chief Uzziel knows what I'm talking about, this has been a source of debate in our community by many. But I would want to go on record to say the great majority in the community that I come from don't believe that it was actually Samuel that came up. They believe that what came up was like an illusion to give in to what Saul wanted to see, but it really wasn't Samuel. I don't necessarily agree with that. I believe it was Shemuel the prophet because the book says, and Shemuel arose. The book did not say, and the magicians of Egypt worked their magic too and then disappeared. Meaning the book didn't give us no clue or hint that this is an illusion or something that's not really taking place. The book says Shemuel appeared. And even said something that I think is even more significant than the book saying that Shemuel appeared. The book says that Shemuel, upon appearing, said, "Why have you woke me from my rest?" This is a very important word that he used. Why? For those who believe that when you die, you're dead, and nothing ever happens, and you lived an entire life of Torah, you were not the richest person, you were not the poorest person, but you made it work, and then you just died, and then your child continues it, and then your child has the same life and the same thing occurs. I want to say this. If death is the truly end, I want us to pay attention to the language used in the scripture. Every single person that dies in the Torah, especially with regard to our patriarchs, the Torah says, and he slept with his fathers. Verbatim. Now, I know this. I'm no brainiac, but I do know this. If I'm describing a person as sleeping, that means, and let me be a little bit more technical. If I say that someone is sleeping, then obviously I'm talking to someone else, like the text is talking to us. The text is telling us that such and such a king died and slept with his fathers. That means the text is talking to us. So if I describe someone as sleeping, it means I'm having a dialogue with someone else. And I'm telling someone else that this person is sleeping. Guess what? If I know this person is dead, I'm not going to say he's sleeping, because I know enough to know that a person who's asleep is going to wake up. Every patriarch that died is said to be resting with his fathers. Death in itself, throughout the narrative of the Torah, is used within the framework and within the language of sleep. One thing I perfectly acknowledge about sleep, whether it's philosophical, whether it's medical, whether it's academic, is that he who is asleep is purported to awake at some point. But let's take it a step further and let's get highly technical. A coma is a deeper form of sleep. And I want to say almost involuntary. But that might be an oxymoron because I don't know nobody that can just make themselves sleep either. But I think you get what I'm trying to say. Death itself throughout the Torah is described as sleep. No one ever asked themselves why. A thought never arose in your mind to say, why does the Torah continually refer to death as a sleep state? When we perfectly understand that when someone sleeps, they eventually going to do what? They're going to wake up. So if I want to cause you to understand that death is the final gate, why would I call it sleep? That's something for you to consider. Because I don't have all the answers. But it's just something for you to consider. I'm not sitting here as an arrogant individual who has all the answers and you must accept everything I'm saying. I'm coming here to share my ideas and I'm hoping to provoke thought and I'm dropping something to cause you to think. Death is described throughout the Torah as a sleep state. And from what I understand, those who sleep wake up. And I even have a proof text for it. In the book of Daniel, chapter, I believe it's 12, it says, and those who sleep in the dust of the earth. Remember, from dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. So again, we're talking about death. And because we're talking about death, Daniel uses and continues to use the language of the Torah when talking about death. Those who sleep in the dust of the earth, what does Daniel go on to say? Shall awake. Some to everlasting life, some to everlasting shame and abhorrence. To be objective and fair, I'm going above and beyond to do this. I can cut and go to different topics, but because I style myself as an objective scholar, I try to give all viewpoints so as to not leave my viewpoint as the only idea that's out there. I'm trying to be fair. In the community that I come from, we always interpreted that particular part of Daniel as meaning those who sleep in the dust of earth, meaning that for a couple millennia, almost 3 millennia, we were without our land, our language, our culture, and our heritage. We were in a spiritual state of sleep, which I believe holds a lot of weight. I'm not taking any credit from that. Also, when it says some shall awake to everlasting life, and some to everlasting shame and abhorrence, and my brother Chief Uzael to the right of me, maybe to your left, may laugh a bit or may not laugh when I say to him, in the school of thought that I came from, and in the community that we came from, it was even taught, and I want to be real with you brothers, and I'm even pull something from you. We used to say, oh, that's the New Testament brothers. Those are the ones that's going to awake to everlasting shame and abhorrence because they woke up and found out they're Israelites only to still go back into those Christian teachings, which we call the New Testament. And those of us who woke up and only saw Torah, like myself and Chief Uzael, we woke up, so to speak, in schools that only taught Torah observance and did not teach out the New Testament. In fact, we taught against it. So we considered ourselves as those who awoke to everlasting life. And those who awoke from their state of spiritual slumber to find out that they're Israelites, but still had their heads knee deep in the text of the New Testament, we said about those brothers, or about you brothers, that you're the ones that inherited shame and everlasting abhorrence because although you know you're an Israelite, at best, you're a Christian Israelite on steroids. This is what we said. And to be fair, to those who are offended by what I'm saying, to be fair, without mentioning my dear brother's name, I had a conversation with a brother who's known in the Messianic community. I want to even say very well known. And we were sitting down one day at an event, and I said to him, I said, man, you know, we come at New Testament brothers when we teach on our bema in our places of worship, but, you know, y'all coming out next too. I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the old days of One West used to teach that at the end of days, when the Messiah returns, it's going to be foot on neck of those Israelites that don't accept the Mashiach in the person of Yahushua or Yeshua or Jesus. To which anybody that doesn't, even if they're an Israelite, they're going to die. So I said to him, and he never corrected me. In fact, he agreed with me. He said, yeah. He said the old One West used to say that not only they going to die, but we going to join in and put hands and feet on those non-Messianic Israelites. So if anyone's offended by me telling you that the school of thought that I come from believe that awakening being spiritual, if you didn't awake to Torah only, you awaken to shame and everlasting abhorrence. I want to just be fair and say, don't take it too personal, because in the schools of thought, which are responsible for many in the Messianic community even waking up, many of you woke up to these same schools of thought teaching on the corners. They taught they was going to put hands and feet, and some of them still teaching that on non-Messianic Israelites. And we never taught that. We never went so far as to say we're going to beat down our brothers that don't accept Torah only. We would ridicule, we would even make fun, but we never went so far to do that. So I just want to be fair.
So, just to make it clear, in terms of a physical resurrection, you believe that there's a physical resurrection?
I believe that there's a physical resurrection. I haven't given what I think is my most powerful proof text, which I'll go on record to not hold back and admit in this moment, but not really with the intention of going into it. One of my main reasons for believing in resurrection, aside from those that I brought out, is the Valley of the Dry Bones. To me, that's the most telling. And
so you believe that the Valley of the Dry Bones
can be interpreted literally.
It's a literal interpretation of people coming from bone connecting to bone, and
absolutely.
And it's not a how do you figurative way of saying something, or
right,
or you just believe that that's literal.
Right, I believe it's literal, and one of the chief reasons why I believe it's literal is because I have to reason to myself that if I can accept the idea that Elijah died 3,000 years ago and is going to return 3,000 years later, then why wouldn't I accept this?
But I think you brought up some very some good points, right? But I think that the Elijah being taken away, most people will say that he was taken away alive, right? And that he didn't die,
right?
And somehow the Most High has kept him preserved all these thousands of years to make a return, to turn the hearts of the children back to the parents, and the hearts of the parents back to the children. I mean, just to be fair, and right, as we're discussing this and as we're going on, because you're bringing a lot of new information that a lot of brothers and sisters might not agree with or might not look eye to eye with, and I think it's important for me as I'm sitting here to be able to express some of these points that people might have in contrast to what you're saying at this moment. I believe that and if you're saying that people are coming back from their graves, so you're saying that King David is coming back from his grave?
I absolutely believe in the resurrection of the body and soul. So yes, I have no problem to be bold enough to go on record to say that I believe wholeheartedly, it's not a sham, I'm not pulling a stunt, I believe Melech Dawid himself will return.
So are they coming back with a new body, or are they coming out of their graves that they were buried in?
That's a great question, and I would say I don't have the answer to that question, because when resurrection is described, with a lot of things that are described in Torah, there's not enough detail. For instance, we're told to make fringes. We're not told how to make fringes. We're told to keep the Shabbat. But what happens when the Shabbat falls on other days? So there's several things in the Torah that we're introduced to without fine details. So when I say that I believe in resurrection, I wholeheartedly believe in resurrection, which is a great adding point that you added on, because I believe you're right by saying, well, then by proxy, I want to be straight, Avdiel. Are you saying King David's coming back? Which I have to say, I know I sound crazy even to you saying, but I wholeheartedly believe that. And in reference to Elijah, to be fair, I'll say this. Even if we accept that the Most High somehow preserved Elijah, and mind you, I agree wholeheartedly with you. I believe that Eliyahu and Enoch are two people that never tasted death. So we're in agreement.
Right.
But I do also know and understand how natural science works. So I want to say that we come from a community that we ridicule other doctrines that don't fall in line with natural science. We've laughed at the idea that Yeshua is purported to die and come back on the third day, because we know first and foremost that doesn't even agree with natural science. But we would be more apt to believe that God preserved Elijah for 3,000 years alive, but not believe that Jesus survived the grave for 3 days. So what I'm pointing out is not hypocrisy in our community, but what I am pointing out is how sometimes we can miss things that are very major just by the fact that if this is all we know, then we give all of our energy into enhancing it. And the way that objective research works is that you're supposed to weigh all evidences equally. So we're supposed to give the same energy that we give to one side that we give to the other. So what I'm just in closing saying is that, yes, I accept the resurrection of the physical body, especially from the perspective that we know for a fact the Torah places deep emphasis that the body must be intact. Meaning that me and you already know, and I don't even think I even have to say the school of thought we come from. Me and you already know Israelites don't get cremated. We know any Israelite get cremated, we looking at them like they're crazy. Why'd you cremate him? Why you didn't bury him? This is the tradition of the Torah. We bury the body 6 feet deep. We return the physical body to the ground. And from a natural science perspective, anything that goes into the ground is coming back up, period. So even your deceased ancestor that you put into the ground 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, somebody may bulldoze that area as they do every day. There's people that live on grave sites, and somebody might plant a garden. And guess what? You don't think that any of those biochemical ingredients that are in that body, because we must understand that there are certain parts of man, and when I say man, I'm including woman. This is science now we're dealing with. Certain parts of man's bones are indestructible, such as the coccyx and the spine. I think it's like C12 or 11 and 10. Indestructible. No matter what happens, you're not destroying it if you just put it in the ground. Other parts will begin to disintegrate and break down. But these various components never break down. What happens if somebody plants a tree there? You don't think that anything comes up? So my point is, why is there emphasis on putting the body, which we already know came from the ground, because from dust thou art, till dust thou shalt return. The Torah tells us we are made of the minerals in the ground, and we know that even from a scientific basis, that the chemicals that are found in the human body are the same chemicals that we found, biochemicals that we found in the ground. And the Torah places emphasis on placing that body there. And I know that what goes down does come up when we plant it in the ground. I know that much. So what I'm suggesting, and what I'm not arrogating, because there's a difference between how I want to share my ideas today. I want to share my ideas from a point of humility, because I think that's where we learn the most. I am not arrogating my ideas and saying this is what it is, but I'm offering a rich outlook on something that many may have overlooked on both sides. Now, mind you, we still have 5 questions left. We didn't even deal with some of the inconsistencies on the New Testament side. I am just now in the initial part of this line of questioning, addressing some of what I believe are inconsistent views that we in our Old Testament community have, from my opinion. We haven't even got to that side. So what I'm saying is, there might be some celebrating like, yeah, he getting them. I didn't even get to you yet. Hold on, we coming.
Okay, so let's go to the next question that I have up here. What is the role of the Messiah based on the Torah's description? And who is Antoninus history as ever fulfilled it? Also, is suffering a part of the Messiah's calling? Is the Mashiach supposed to suffer in any way, shape, or form? And if so, what is your proof? And does that Torah and does the Torah support what you're saying?
I had to take off my jacket for this one. Because if you thought I was uncomfortable answering those first set of questions, I'm going to tell you right now, this is extremely uncomfortable, and I will admit that it's uncomfortable to even address this question. And I say uncomfortable from the space, the intellectual and spiritual space, that for years, some of the things that I've already said are things that I personally rejected. 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't tell me nothing about resurrection. I'd be on your kadiok. That's the Hebrew way to say our behind part. I'd be on your you know what, talking that resurrection stuff. But, I believe that the goal of education is growth. And I believe that I've come into ideas within the last 10 years that may have challenged some of the views that I held. And from a perspective of learning, that's a great thing. We should never shun or be afraid to grow with information. So I want to say that to answer the question verbatim, I even want to look at the question again and just restate it. What is the role of the Messiah based on the Torah's description? And let me just first deal with that, because this question is like a 2 and 3 part question. So the role of the Messiah based on the Torah's description is we're dealing with a descendant of King David first and foremost, who is anointed, hence the term Mashiach or Messiah. He's anointed, which means he is spiritually empowered to do that which no other human being can do. When the oil of anointment, which is meshek or mashak in Hebrew, minus the yod, is poured upon an individual, a priest, a king, a prophet, this individual is powered to do that which is normally only done in heaven. In other words, the individual with the anointing of God, no one else can do but other individuals with that same anointing. The Mashiach is an anointed leader descending from the line of King David through his son Solomon. Very important. To come and gather in the exiles of Israel, to judge the nations of the earth, and to rebuild the third and final temple. If any of these elements do not occur, then there are some problems with the messiahship of said individual. But to be fair and objective, let me say this. Does anyone know that at no given time, anywhere in the Torah, which would be the 5 books of Moses, or the Tanakh, the entire Old Testament, is the Davidic leader who was purported to come and judge the nations, rebuild the temple, and gather in the exiles, called the Messiah or Mashiach? Hence why my good brother to the right of me, to your left, Chief Uziel Ben Levi, who in many ways I believe is a mentor to me, I want to get these things on record, is that in the community that I come from, we've even found a problem with calling this future leader a Messiah because the Torah don't even call him that. There are 39 times that this term Mashiach is used in the whole Old Testament. If you find another time or any few times, post it so we can see now. But the last time I checked, and if you know me, you know I checked. There's 39 occurrences of the term Mashiach in various forms. And 37 of those times, it's just translated and just referring to anointment or anointing. 2 of those times, which is the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses, I believe, 25 and 26 or 26 and 27, it refers to an anointed leader in the book of Daniel 9. But all other 37 occurrences, this term Mashiach is just talking about an individual anointed, such as Aaron. And to take it a step further, and I'm talking to my New Testament community, I've heard brothers in the New Testament or Messianic community refer to Yeshua as HaMashiach. I ask why. And I ask why from a place of humility. But I ask why. I ask why because find me a prophecy in the Old Testament where the anointed leader to come from the loins of David is called the Messiah and or is even called HaMashiach, the Messiah. I'll wait. You see, we can't invent what we want and then add it into our own textual exegesis because that would be an oral tradition that you say you reject. You say you reject teachings that can't be found in the text, so why are you calling the Messiah to come HaMashiach? Are you going to show me where he's called HaMashiach by the prophets of God or by God himself? So if you can't show me that, then you should not be doing that because by proxy, many of you say you reject the oral tradition. That's number one. The only person, as my brother Chief Uzael knows, we had a beautiful conversation about this a while back, that is ever called HaMashiach in all of scriptures is Aaron, the high priest. No one else is ever called HaMashiach. And guess what? That's a testimony to the greatness of Aaron. That not even King David was called HaMashiach. Not even the anointed leader to come that would rebuild the temple, gather in the exiles, and judge the nations of the earth, even he is not called HaMashiach. So those who are walking around talking about HaMashiach, I would say, unless you accept the oral tradition, you have to slow your roll. Because you tell me you only accept what the text say. That any extrapolation that is not in the text is rabbinic. That's that Jewish stuff. So you saying HaMashiach don't sound anything different than Jewish to me by your own definition, to be fair. This term Mashiach refers to an anointed individual empowered by God from the loins or a descendant of King David, empowered spiritually, intellectually, and physically to rebuild the temple, gather in the exiles. This is his calling. And we have to understand that. So, and judge the nations of the earth. I was thinking the whole time if you didn't catch on. This is live, people. We can't edit. He's going to judge the nations of the earth, rebuild the temple, and gather in the exiles. And even he is nowhere referred to in the entire Tanakh as HaMashiach. This is just truth. You can hate me for telling the truth, but at the end of the day, you look real silly because I'm not making this up. As we're talking, you could do a word search right now. You could do your word search in Greek. You could do your word search in Hebrew. You could do your word search in Aramaic. Nowhere is the anointed leader ever called a HaMashiach, the one who's to come and rebuild the temple, gather in the exiles, and judge the nations. So why do we call him HaMashiach? In fact, I'm talking to my New Testament brothers again. Why do we believe that Yeshua, who you believe, or who is believed to be the Mashiach, is the most righteous Mashiach to come? Because that is what the book in the New Testament says. He's the most righteous. When the Old Testament says, in reference to another Mashiach, who like all Mashiachs other than Aaron is never called HaMashiach, Hezekiah is said to be the most righteous king that ever came to the throne and who will ever come to the throne. That's in the book of Kings. Hezekiah is said in the book of Kings, somebody please post a chapter and a verse. Hezekiah is said to be the most righteous king to come to the throne, period. That means anybody before Hezekiah didn't surpass his righteousness according to the text. I'm not extrapolating. I'm not using esoteric, interpretations. There's no gematria here. There's no illusions. It's what the text says. There was no king as righteous as Hezekiah before him. And guess what the text says? There shall not be another king as righteous as him after. And guess what? He had flaws. That's deep. For those who think that the Messiah to come is not supposed to have flaws. When the book told you there's going to be no righteous king to come in the future more righteous than Hezekiah, and we know even Hezekiah had flaws. That's just something to think about. Now, when we talk about the second part of the question, I'm going to read that too. And who, if anyone in history, has ever fulfilled the role of the Mashiach? I want to say on record, the role of the Mashiach has not been fulfilled. Some of y'all was waiting just for that point, and then some of y'all going to turn me out now because you was hoping for something. The role of the Mashiach has not been fulfilled for three chief points that I spent, I think, 7 minutes pointing out. The third temple has not been rebuilt. The exiles have not been gathered in, and the nations of the earth have not been judged. We are not even restored. Hence, the exiles have not been gathered in. So how has the role of the Mashiach been fulfilled when none of these things have occurred? So no, the role of the Mashiach has not been fulfilled. Now, here is the tough part. The third part of the question is, and mind y'all, I want to let y'all know, Chief Uzziel can see it, but y'all might can't. I'm actually sweating as I'm talking to y'all. Just so y'all know. I'm giving you literally, not just figuratively, the temperature in the room. And I don't mean it's really hot in here, but I'm sweating. I'm sweating because of the context and the serious nature of this information. Before going into the next question, I want the community to understand this. It's not easy to enter a dialogue that forget about believe, that the majority of both sides of the community is not going to like what you present. Do you know that a fact of man is this, and it's actually quite simple? Most men, and by men I'm including women, most men and women will only and solely enter a dialogue when they know they're speaking to two diverse communities, when they know one community got their back. Do you know and understand how hard it is and how much pressure it is to know that what you have to share is a strike at both communities you're talking to that might cause you to be cut off by both communities simply because of what you're sharing? So when I'm telling you I'm sweating, it's not because I'm weak. It's because I place a lot of respect on this information. And it's not easy to go against the grain to speak truth. But guess what? That's actually the foundation of truth speakers. When you are in possession of what you believe, and I'm being objective now, I don't have all the answers. When you are in possession of what you believe to be the truth, you got to go against the grain. So I'm not doing this for fame, because I've always said, if I want to change tomorrow and become, as they say, Messianic, listen, I could tell you things about Yeshua that will cause steam to come from your head damn near. That will make a lot of people feel challenged about their worldview in rejecting him. But I don't believe in Yeshua. I believe in God. I don't even believe in Moses, although I have faith in his words. I believe in God. We are commanded to believe in the Creator, no one else. We're commanded to have faith in the testimony that Moshe gave, but my faith is based on what God left on record, what God speaks. So I want to be clear. And now I'm going to deal with the elephant. Is the Messiah supposed to suffer in any way, shape, or form? And if so, what is your proof? And does the Torah support what you're saying? I'm 39 years old. I just turned 39 November 7th. When I was about 20, not even 20, when I was about 19, well, yeah, about 20, I'll stay. When I was about 20 years old, I was in John Jay College, and I encountered a professor in my philosophy class who was a former Christian but was now an atheist. He was actually a former Christian minister. He's now an atheist. And even to this day, he's an atheist. He teaches at John Jay College still. I believe Greg is his name. I forgot his last name. He challenged me heavily on my views on the Bible because he's an atheist. And he had a lot of knowledge of the New Testament. And he brought something to my attention years ago that I never heard anywhere, much less in the community I'm from or the school I'm from. And he said, well, you know, the idea of a suffering servant is not new, right? You know that even with those who come from schools of thought where it's Old Testament only, that there is a concept that the Messiah is supposed to suffer, right? He said, I mean, whether we like it or not, Isaiah 53 is still in the Old Testament last time I checked. And whether you believe it's Israel or whether you believe it's the Messiah, whether you call Israel the Messiah, whether you call the Messiah, whether you call Israel the suffering servant, or whether you call the Messiah the suffering servant, you're both still saying the servant is supposed to suffer. I sat there and I thought about it, and the first thing I said is, this man is full of you know what. And I challenged him every day that semester on it. And I challenged him. And one day I came to him and I said to him, where did you find this? Where is their concept? He said, I just gave you what you accept. The Old Testament, Isaiah 53. He said, you just think it's the nation of Israel collectively that's this suffering servant. But he said, in case, you're missing the elephant in the room, you're still saying the servant is supposed to suffer. I never thought about that. This is why information and knowledge on a whole, and wisdom in particular, only rests upon the humble spirit. Do you know that when your mind is made up, you can't learn anymore? Do you know that when your mind is made up on something or someone, you can't learn or grow anymore? It took someone beating me on my head, literally day after day, telling me this, till my ego, which is what was on defense, finally broke down to give ear to what this person was saying, to simply give ear. So when I finally gave ear to what this person was saying, I opened up Isaiah 53 all over again. And I said, the school of thought in the community I come from says that the suffering servant is Israel. The Messianic community says the suffering servant is Jesus. What is the common denominator? They both believe the servant is supposed to suffer. That's deep, because I never thought about that. And that's the point about being humble. And I know a lot of people don't see me as humble, but what I want to remind people is, none of y'all know me in my personal life. You just see me engage on camera, and you usually are accustomed to 98% of the time see me debating. So you're literally watching a different beast. Anybody that's really close to me, and this is not an opportunity for me to toot my horn, but I'm just trying to be objective and honest. People that know me personally will say that I see how his confidence can be construed as arrogance, but it's actually a humble brother. And he's actually a humble brother because he'll be the first to admit he's wrong publicly and privately. He's a humble brother because he's not afraid to go on record challenging things that he knows he'd be up a you-know-what creek for saying. And what I'm saying on the whole is that we can't learn unless we make ourselves humble. We can't grow. So it took me humbling myself, pushing my ego completely out the room for me to see that, damn, whether we believe it's Israel or whether they believe it's Jesus, we both saying the servant's supposed to suffer. Wow. Because that's what Isaiah 53 is saying. Forget our interpretation of who is suffering. Isaiah is clearly telling you that servant suffered. So to answer that question with a little bit of flavor, you damn right, I believe in the concept of a suffering servant. And I'll first say this, to go on record. In the oral tradition, in commentary to Isaiah 53, in Sanhedrin, I'll go there first. Sanhedrin 98a and 98b in the oral tradition. I'm giving you references so you can check me out. In Sanhedrin 98a and 98b, you'll find that the Mashiach is called the leper scholar. Why is he called the leper scholar? You do recall in Isaiah 53, I believe it's verse 4, it says that he was smitten. That word for smitten that's used is the word that's usually described usually used to describe someone who is smitten with a disease such as leprosy. It says that he was smitten and afflicted. So the sages of the oral tradition says the Mashiach shall be called the leper scholar, which I found interesting for two reasons. The first reason I found interesting is because they took the fact that he's said to suffer and be afflicted literally. So they said that he may be a leper. But there's another significant reason why I paid attention to this particular saying in the oral tradition. They called him a scholar. I've always viewed the Davidic leader to come that we believe is a Messiah to be a warrior. Intellectual nonetheless, but a warrior, a leader. They called him the leper scholar. And they said, and I'm giving you the full quotation, they said he's called the leper scholar because he is smitten. And he is sitting among the diseased and sick. And he is wrapping bandages around himself, but he's wrapping the bandages one at a time. I gave you quotes so you can see I'm not making this up. Sanhedrin 98b we're on right now. I gave you 98a. 98b. The leper scholar is sitting among the sick and he's wrapping bandages, but he's not wrapping them fast-paced like everyone else. He's putting them down slowly. The sages ask, why is he wrapping his bandages on slowly? And the answer is, in case he is called to office to do the work he is commissioned to do, he is wrapping them one at a time so as to be prepared to drop everything and go and do his duty. Sanhedrin 98b in the oral tradition. When you go into Sukkah 52b in the oral tradition, and there's a reason why the Mashiach in the oral tradition is in the book of Sanhedrin and in the book of Sukkah for a reason. The book of Sanhedrin represents the codification of laws dealing with how to judge citizens, people, everyday matters. Hence, we all already know the Sanhedrin to be a body of judges post Second Temple period, some believe even First Temple period, a body of judges commissioned to judge the people. Hence, in the book of Deuteronomy, we read, if there be a matter too great for the judge within your vicinity, you are to go to the judges in Jerusalem for that matter to be adjudicated. And that ruling body has always been referred to as a Sanhedrin. So in the oral tradition, in the book called Sanhedrin 98b, you find one of the very first discussions about the Mashiach. Why is the Mashiach discussed in the book of Sanhedrin as opposed to the book of Makot, as opposed to Nedarim? I'm giving you other tractates within the oral tradition. Why is it in Sanhedrin? Because Sanhedrin represents judging. And the Mashiach, or the purported Davidic king to come, is supposed to do what? Judge the nations. So while we're having discourse in the oral tradition about how judgment is proceeded with, the ultimate judgment is the judgment of the Messianic era. So yes, this is one of the places you'll find the Mashiach discussed in the oral tradition. Now, when we open up the book of Sukkah 52b, you'll see, and there's a reason why we open up the book Sukkah. One of the reasons why I have a problem with people using the term Mashiach for the Messiah and other terms is because I say the Torah doesn't use the term, the Old Testament doesn't use the term Mashiach to describe this leader. It uses some other terms, and I'll give you one for example. It uses the term branch. There shall be a branch. I have a question. Why is the Mashiach called a branch?
Because it comes from a tree.
Because it comes from a tree, right? Now, I have a follow-up question. Why is the Mashiach not called a tree?
Because the tree is already formed. That means that there are other things that came before that branch. The branch is an extension of the tree.
You see why discussions of this nature are so important to have people who are very astute in literature. If I was sitting with anybody else, the answers would have been crazy. But the dialogue is perfect because this is exactly what it is. So, third question now. How many branches on the tree?
It depends on how big the tree is.
We're going somewhere.
Right.
We don't know how many branches on every tree because every tree don't have the same amount of branches, right? But you ever encountered a tree that only made one branch?
No.
No. There's a reason why the Mashiach is called a branch. There's a reason why the Mashiach is called a branch.
Because he's not the only Mashiach.
You see, if we were in, I'm glad my brother Chief Uziel is here, astute. If we were in First Temple, period, and you walked into Jerusalem, and you said, where's the Mashiach? Everyone would say, which one? You talking about the king? You talking about the high priest? Or you talking about a prophet?
Right.
We are thinking in modern terms when we use this term Mashiach to just refer to this anointed leader to come, forgetting that during the period when Israel was a nation living in the land of Israel, the term Mashiach could apply to any one of three individuals at any given time. And seeing that there were several prophets, and there were several priests, and there were several kings, there were several Mashiachs.
Right.
So when the scriptures say there shall be a branch, yes, we know this branch is talking about the Mashiach, but it's referring to the Mashiach as a branch because there's many Mashiachs. But I'm going to take it a step further because I'm going to go into oral tradition. The oral tradition says there are at least 36 righteous descendants of King David in every single generation. I'm going to say it again. The oral tradition says there are at least 36 righteous descendants of King David in any given generation from the time of King David till now. That's at least 36 branches. That means at any given time period, the time of the end can come. Do you know, Israel, and I'm talking to all communities, we dictate the time of the end. What do I mean by that? When the Creator promises something good, it has to happen. When the Creator promises something bad, it doesn't have to happen, because if you repent, it won't happen. That's something to consider. If the Creator says that at the end of days, I'm going to bless you with this, that, and the third, that has to happen. But if he says at the end of days, I'm going to curse this person, that doesn't have to happen if that person repents. Only a blessing in the future has to occur, but a curse can be annulled. We have the power at any given time, if the entire nation raises to an extreme state of righteous consciousness, to immediately inaugurate and usher in the Messianic era and the Messiah himself, so to speak, the anointed king. Every generation. Hence why the Messiah to come is referred to not as Mashiach, but as a branch. Every generation got a branch like him. If you don't think that's true, this is why being involved in the community is important and not just being YouTube and Facebook Israelites. So we gave a lecture almost a full year ago where we talked about Marcus Garvey.
Right.
In that lecture, I'm going to be a little spooky now. In that lecture, I used esoteric methodology to show a connection between the name Marcus Garvey and the term Mashiach. I found that the term Marcus Mosiah Garvey had the exact same numerical equivalent in Hebrew as the term Mashiach. Why? We all know about Marcus Garvey, I hope. And many of us know that Marcus Garvey was a powerful individual. More powerful than some of the best teachers we all know. Some of the best teachers we all know didn't put several different faith bases in the same room and get them to come together on the same accord to do something great for all. Marcus Garvey did it. But I know the backlash. Marcus Garvey didn't keep Torah. If you only knew what many of us knew, he was very close to it. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Matthews was in his ear. Rabbi Ford was in his ear. Marcus Garvey was on the cusp of proclaiming his Israelite identity. Hence why he said, the greatest wisdom of the age is to be found in the Bible. You think he never heard of the Book of the Dead, the Per Em Heru? You think he never heard, and I'm sorry, my Moorish brothers, with all due respect, you think he never heard of the Aquarian Gospel? No disrespect. I love my Moorish brothers, but I'm speaking true. Marcus Garvey was aware of several different factions, but he went on record to say the greatest, not the least, not it's up there, the greatest wisdom of the age is only to be found in the Bible. And his name in Hebrew is numerically equivalent to Mashiach. Going back to that term, 36 generations, 36 righteous individuals in every single generation. Hence why in referring to the Mashiach to come, the Torah calls him a branch. In every generation, we have someone ready to go. Do you know if Torah is not kept for an instance, the whole universe reverts back to nothingness? Remember, the foundation of the universe is the Torah itself. If Torah is not kept somewhere around the world at all times, all bets are off. Every single generation has at least 36 righteous men and women keeping this thing going. And any one of those 36 descendants of Melech David can be that branch. So in the oral tradition, it says that the term a branch is referring to the idea that every single generation has at least 36 righteous people in it. A tree has several branches. There's not just one person capable. We all are capable. That's the major difference. And I'm speaking to my New Testament brothers because there's a tendency to place such grandeur and overemphasis on the personality, the spirit, the intellect of Yeshua, or some people say Christ. I say, why? Any great righteous man, any one of those branches can do it. You know the saying, ain't no one man above the team. You crazy? Next question.
That's the third part. We moving straight ahead. So I guess we'll come back to some of the things that you've already said at the end, because I'm making notes of some things, and then we could come back to it.
All right.
What is the name of the Messiah?
Let me go on record to say this. That's a very bold question, and I want everyone to know I actually wrote that question. So my answer is really going to bother you when I'm going on record to tell you I wrote that question. It's a very bold question for someone to say that they know the name of the Messiah. And I want to say this. I'm no Messiah. I'm no special person. I like to think of myself the same way that King David thought about himself, even though I know I'm not even King David. But I like to think of myself the same way King David thought of himself. Follow me where I'm going. King David said, "What is man that thou even consider him? When I consider the heavens and the work of your hands, what is man that you are even mindful of him?" You ever looked at a picture of Earth from space and how the Earth looked like a speck of dust? And that if you ever been on a plane, you ever looked at tall buildings and look how speckish they look? And then you ever stand next to a tall building and look how speckish you look next to it? I ain't nothing. But I do want to tell you this. the spirit of wisdom rests upon those who it rests upon, and the spirit of understanding rests upon those who rest upon, and knowledge is free to all who pursue it. I believe I've uncovered information on the name of the Mashiach, and I want to be very honest right now to tell you, I don't think I'm ever going to go on record and say it. So next question. Because when I encountered the name gave me chills. So I'm going to say that alone. And I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm not trying to give a sense of, angels floating above me. Oh, he got the name. Because I could be wrong too. And that's another reason why I'm going to hold back, like I've been holding back on some of the information I shared today. Just because you learn something new that you believe may challenge something you used to know and you think is greater, don't just run to go share it. Examine it until you reach a point where you feel confident in sharing. And even within that, you got to say to yourself, how smart am I for doing so with the climate? So with all that being said, I honestly feel chills by the name, and I don't want to say what the name is.
But to be fair, doesn't the Tanakh already give us a name for that king that will sit on the throne, at least during that time? And I know it gives a description of him, but it's also a name. Yahuwah Zidquenu, Yahuwah our righteousness, right? Mm-hmm. When we read it, Jeremiah chapter 23, if we read it, I believe it's like we read from verse 1. I like reading things from the beginning. As we were taught to read things from the beginning. Jeremiah 23, verse 1, it says, "Woe unto the shepherds that destroy and scatter the sheep of my pastures, saith Yahuwah. Therefore thus saith Yahuwah, the God of Israel, against the shepherds that feed my people. Ye have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not taken care of them. Behold, I will visit upon you the evil of your doing, saith Yahuwah. And I'll gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries whither I have driven them, and I'll bring them back to their foes, and they shall be fruitful and multiply. And I'll set up shepherds over them, who shall feed them, and they shall fear no more, nor be dismayed, neither shall any be lacking, saith Yahuwah. Behold, the days come, saith Yahuwah, that I'll raise unto David, a righteous shoot, and he shall reign as king and prosper, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called. The Lord is our righteousness." When you said in Hebrew, his name shall be Yahuwah Zidquenu, right?
Right.
Or Yah Zidquenu, if we want to shorten it, or however we are gonna, because we could make a name, in Hebrew, that's but right. It specifically says here that shoot from Jesse, right, that descendant of David, which we know to be, for lack of a better word, or Messiah or whatever, mm-hmm, that is given a name here by the prophet, or the Most High gave the prophet the insight to know that person's name. Mm-hmm. So what do you say about that?
I say this. There's actually a couple names, right, for the Mashiach. And I put air quotes on Mashiach, right, because we know that purported leader was never called Mashiach. Right. And I'm just saying that for people who are joining in. I want them to be on the same page, right, throughout the dialogue. There's a couple names that the Torah has, the Tanakh has, aside from Yahuwah Zidquenu. And here's what I want to say in relation to that. These different names, which I think are a total of 3. The different names that the Torah has for this anointed leader is not a contradiction to any one name already given among the 3. I call to our memory Shlomo. We know King Solomon as Shlomo. The Tanakh is very explicit when it says, and the Creator called him Yedidiah. In fact, one of my best friends and closest confidants in this way of life is a brother by the name of Nasi Yedidiah ben Yehuda, the son of Crown Prince Zerubbabel. Yedidiah is another name for Shlomo. So throughout scriptures, there's actually a pattern or a template for individuals having more than one name. Father Yaakov, his name was changed to Yisrael. So I want to say the Mashiach definitely has more than one name, and there's a reason why he has more than one name. And different names don't contradict. The reason why the Mashiach, number one, has more than one name is that he has more than one role. And sometimes a role can be so immense that a different name is needed. Hence, the Creator knew when Yaakov was named what his father was going to name him, and still allowed it. Because what Yaakov fulfilled within that name, remember, he was the supplanter. So that name was fitting. But Yaakov also rose to a spiritual plateau where, as the book says, and you shall no longer be known as Yaakov. Not this level of consciousness you arose to, and I'm adding that. But Yisrael shall be your name. So the anointed leader to come, in my opinion, I don't know it all, in my opinion, has different names because the immense nature of his role. He's rebuilding the temple.
Right.
That's if he came to do that alone, that's immense by itself. He's gathering the exiles of Israel, which means, number one, he's going to identify who the Israelites are. That's a whole nother role that's immense within itself without building a temple. We live in an era right now where man can destroy Earth and damn near a third of the universe without nuclear power. A third. And this is scientific, by the way. I'm not just throwing these numbers out of hat. Science, modern science says man now has enough nuclear weapons to destroy a third of the known universe. This to show you that no matter how great we think man's ingenuity is, you know how great God is? And then guess what? As soon as science gave that number, this is the irony of that and the joke. As soon as science came out and said, man has the nuclear capability to destroy a third of the universe, you know that number changed immediately? You want to know why that number changed immediately? The universe is continually what? Expanding. So that number ain't even a third now. This is the greatness of God. You ain't destroying nothing. Just want to make that clear. You know, to enhance faith in those who are worried about man's nuclear capability.
The next thing that I wanted to ask before it gets away from me. So if you're saying where in Isaiah 50, because I'm not sure if you made it clear.
Okay.
Isaiah 53, the suffering servant.
Yes.
So you're saying that the suffering servant is the anointed king to come, or the Messiah?
Yes, I believe the suffering servant is not necessarily the nation of Israel collectively. I believe that it is the anointed king, which actually segues into the next part of the question.
So where in that chapter, or where in the vicinity of that chapter, can we prove that Isaiah 53 is even speaking about a Messiah?
Okay. So we're going to open up the book of Isaiah 53, and we'll read it.
All right.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Who has believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed?
Well, you know, Isaiah 53, you have to read it from 52 to get the full spectrum.
52.
15, I believe. Oh, let me make sure. Let me look at it. Behold, my servant shall prosper. Shall not.
13.
Right.
13. Hallelujah. Isaiah 52:13. I'm not sure in the King JV, but in the Tanakh 52:13. Behold, my servant shall prosper. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. As many as were astonished at you, saying, his appearance. I pause here. This is why in Sanhedrin 98b, it was taught in the oral tradition that the anointed leader to come would be someone who was stricken, so to speak. Hence why they refer to him as a leper scholar. As you can see in verse 14, it says, his appearance is too marred to be that of a man. And this is for those who take it literal, by the way.
Right.
And his form to be that of the sons of man. So shall he startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him, for that which had not been told them they shall see, and that which they had not heard shall they perceive. Isaiah 53.
Right.
Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He had no form nor comeliness that we should look at him. There was no countenance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with sickness. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne or carried our afflictions and our sorrows, yet we esteemed him, here goes that word, stricken. In Hebrew, it's negua. Anybody know that term negua is used throughout the book of Leviticus in talking about diseases of the flesh. We esteemed him stricken, struck by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded because of our transgressions. He was bruised because of our iniquities. His sufferings were that we might have peace. And this part is very important. I have to pause here for a second. I'm speaking to the New Testament community now. The New Testament community says this is Yeshua HaMashiach. I disagree with that. I have to be on record. I disagree totally that Isaiah 53, verse 5, or anywhere in Isaiah 53, is Yeshua HaMashiach of the New Testament. I just want to make that clear, because I know I said a lot this week and people are very unclear. Right. Making that very, very clear. Here's the point I want to pause on. His sufferings, whether you believe it's Israel collectively or Mashiach in particular, and I'm talking to the New Testament community, so I'll say Mashiach, was so that we would have peace. Didn't say so that we would have atonement. It didn't say so that his death would be in sacrifice or in place of our righteousness.
Right.
It simply said so that we would have what?
Peace.
Peace. This is why paying attention is so important. I'll move on. And by his bruises, we are healed. By his stripes. All we like sheep have gone astray, and we have turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, but he humbled himself and opened not his mouth. He was brought like a lamb to the slaughter, not as. And like a sheep that is dumb before his shearers, he did not open his mouth. By oppression and false judgment was he taken away, and of his generation who considered. For he was cut off from the land of the living. Stricken, that word nega again. I hope the ignorant people out there thinking I said N-I-G-G-A. The word in Hebrew is nega, which is spelled nun gimel ayin, for those ignorant people that like to laugh just because they're bored. You know, right. We like entertainment, right? There goes that word again. He was stricken for the transgression of my people. Now, here's what I want to say. The writer is speaking now. And the writer is saying the individual who was being stricken is stricken for the transgression of my people. Now I'm talking to the Old Testament community. Did a non-Israelite write Isaiah 53? Because if a non-Israelite wrote Isaiah 53, then yes, Israel is the suffering servant collectively, and the nations, which would be the my people related to the non-Israelite that wrote this, the nations benefited. The nations continued to thrive because temporarily God was dealing with us, and the fact that because we slipped, we caused all the earth to go off course. So in our merit and in our chastisement, the nations found some peace and some time saved. God put it on us. That would only be true if the writer of Isaiah is a non-Israelite. But if the writer of Isaiah is an Israelite, like I believe we all believe, whether you're Messianic or not, then we have to consider this point. The writer is saying, for he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. The writer is calling the person who is being wounded. It says that he was wounded, whoever that person is. Let's put a question mark around that person or those people. He was wounded for the transgression of my people. So it can't be Israel. Israel wasn't wounded for the transgressions of my people, and we're still talking about Israel. It doesn't make sense. If we are separating the person being beaten for the people whose transgressions he's being beaten for, it can't be the same. So I'm speaking to the Old Testament community when I point this out in a challenging way, but not in an arrogant challenging way, but in a challenging way nonetheless. We can't have it both ways. If Israel is a suffering servant, then consider verse 8. He, the person who was being chastised, was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. So Israel is this person that was cut off from the land of the living, and he was stricken for his own people. Israel, the nation of Israel was stricken for Israel, and is the suffering servant. You see why we run into what we call an intellectual corner?
But I believe that a lot of the, or some of the teachings that I've gotten is that those are the nations speaking, because when we get, as you understand, there's two, by what we understand, there are two different types of Isaiah. You have the historical portion of Isaiah, and when we get to this portion of the book of Isaiah, it's more of a poetical, or a lot of it is being spoken like poetically.
Absolutely.
Right? It's being expressed poetically. So there's a lot of things that might be misconstrued because of the way that the prophet is putting things in a way that might be confusing. So if we look into it literally, that it might confuse us. But the way that we were taught is that those were the nations speaking about the children of Israel, or the nation of Israel. Those were the other nations, the heathens, speaking about the children of Israel.
Okay.
Right? So I don't know if that part of it if you look at it, and the reason why I asked, where does it speak in any part of that book that, or said that the suffering servant is the Messiah, is because I never seen it written that it speaks about anything about a seed of David. It doesn't speak about any. We just assume because of the argument of that we've been having with the brothers and sisters, that they always bring this up because the New Testament always speaks of Jesus being beaten, and so they automatically assume that this is a chapter about a Messiah, right? But it's never really, I never really see it written where it says that this is speaking like Jeremiah 23. We know a branch of Jesse, a son of David, being called Jehovah in our righteousness. Although it doesn't say specifically that he is a Messiah or anointed one, we understand that because he's going to sit on the throne, that he will have to be anointed. So automatically it will make him a Messiah. But this chapter right here, I don't see anywhere where it speaks of him or the suffering servant being a Messiah, but I could be wrong.
No, and I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna agree with you in saying that when we read the Torah itself,
right,
it's best that we refrain from reading it linearly.
Okay.
And it's more apropos to read it as a panoramic text.
Okay.
So
you always say that,
right? So even by example, and I'm going to use, this is why this was just so perfect. Being in your studio today and being able to sit here with you. You gave an example of what I'm saying right now. You said, "Slow down, man. Slow down. This is going somewhere." We in Isaiah 53. This is you can't start at 53. You got to start at 52, because the text don't begin in 53. The text actually begins here, because we know that chapter, numbers, all that is a later addition.
Right.
There was no division as we see today, like Numbers and chapter 30. And when Isaiah wrote the text and the people first read it, this wasn't known as Isaiah 53.
Right.
All that is later.
It was right.
So what I'm saying is, there's a reason we had numbers back then.
Right.
There's a reason why our ancestors never numbered the text.
Right.
When you number the text, it is believed subconsciously that here is where the train of thought stops.
Right.
Numbering of sacred texts began with Greco-Romans handling African sacred texts. Even the Per Emheru, so-called Book of the Dead, don't have numbers on it. I have it. There's no numbers to the text. But when you read it today, it's numbered. African civilizations or African ideology or African theology on the whole believes in looking at a text panoramically. In order for me to understand what a person is saying here, I have to examine everything. Even from the perspective of academia, they say what? A person who answers before he has heard the full thing, his answer is considered what? Folly.
Right.
Great respect to Brother Divine Prospect, who noted that on my post this week.
Right.
Everybody went crazy. Zion Lexx is Messianic. Divine Prospect said, yeah, he who gives the answer before hearing the beginning of the matter, his answer is considered folly. Shout out to that brother. His wisdom is always on point. I didn't even clarify my position, and people were shouting yay, and people was deleting me. Taking the time out now to say I got deleted by people, just so y'all know. I have people that deleted and actually blocked me on the Old Testament only side because I said I'm Messianic. I didn't even clarify my position. There was even people on the Old Testament side that inboxed me and was like, yo, I'm with you wherever you go. Whoa, you with me wherever I go? So if I switch from Old Testament only today and I say the only Savior or King is Yeshua HaMashiach, you with me on that without me clarifying my position? That is the definition of what we call a cult.
Right.
And as leaders and teachers, we're supposed to be doing everything but cult stuff.
Right.
You following a man when you do that. And by proxy and by definition, your butt is in a cult.
Right.
I must clarify my position before you do anything. And even after my position is clarified, if you put that much respect on what I say, read it, pray on God, but damn, you just moving like that because Zion said it? King David said, when I look at the heavens,
right,
the work of your hands, right, what is man that you are even mindful of him? Who the hell is Zion Lexx?
That's right.
That you just going to jump on the other side because he said it's this.
Right.
I'm keeping it funky. Keeping it 100. I'm keeping it real. So I'm saying that to say
somebody said this discussion is so deep that they almost burnt their dinner. I had to tell you that. There's a lot of comments because we've been so deep with the conversation, so I didn't want to like kill your thought. But people have been reacting positively to the conversation, and I just a brief intermission. People have been reacting positively, mostly.
Right.
You know, you have some trolls that have jumped in and try to derail the conversation. Right. But for most part, from what I see, is people are having healthy conversations on both ends. It's going back and forth, and I think that this is what it's about. You know, I know going back to certain people, and like I've always spoken to you and told you, I've like Avdia. Chief, you need to find your path. You need to find how you're going to grow because everybody is not going to accept you. Everybody is not going to be as welcoming as me with you because I look at you as a friend.
Right.
It doesn't mean we agree on everything, but I look at you as a friend. And I had to consider that if I have friends that don't even do Torah, someone who is like mine to me, but we might not see eye to eye on everything. How am I going to forsake someone like that? You know what I'm saying? And we agree on 90% of what we know. You know what I'm saying?
To touch on what you're saying, and I definitely want you to continue, but I want to jump in real quick. A brother hit me up on Facebook a couple days ago and said, man, brother, just want to let you know, no matter the outcome, you know I'm non-Messianic. Another brother, no matter the outcome, you know I'm Messianic. Whatever you say, you still my brother.
That's important.
You might be a brother that I believe is wrong,
right.
but you still my brother.
Right.
And you know what I responded to those brothers saying? I said, thank you very much for pointing that out. Because
right.
in my humble opinion, we should never cut a brother off so long as that brother and what he's doing or what he's saying doesn't rob God of his glory.
Right.
If I haven't said anything that robs God of his glory, why are you cutting me off?
Right.
Because you're supposed to cut somebody off if they're doing things that rob God of his glory. Hence why God say, if your friend, you find out that he's serving other gods, you got to be the one to bring him up to the judges, and your hand got to be the first to grab that stone.
That's right.
And introduce it to his brain.
That's right.
Off with his head.
That's right.
Why? Because idolatry does what? Robs God of his glory.
That's right.
Idolatry says God needed somebody help.
Right.
And I'm speaking to a lot of people. I hope everybody is open. I ain't going to take shots now and say what community I speak to, but I think we know what community I speak to. When we say God need help, you're robbing God of his glory. When you say God did this with such and such, you're robbing God of his glory.
Right.
Miriam was righteous, and she challenged Moses, and she died right after.
Right.
She didn't make it to the land. And guess what? She was punished with leprosy.
Right.
Still didn't make it to the land.
Right.
Moses, what did Moses do wrong? He hit the rock. God said, speak to it. He said, shall we give you drink? Now, I don't know it all, but I know this. God told Moses, hit the rock, speak to the rock, and he hit it.
He hit it.
So he was wrong. But I believe he still has some rope left. You know, they say give a person enough rope. He still has some rope left.
Right.
As soon as Moses said, shall we give you drink?
Put himself
as if this is coming with God. As if you standing with God and instead of God to make this happen, all bets was off. You ain't seeing that land. You could put on 3D, 9D glasses and you ain't seeing that land.
Right.
And all due respect to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, with all due respect, may his memory be blessed. Because of that, he didn't get in.
Right.
So when we rob God of his glory, yeah, you cut off, Ak. But I want to say to everyone that has listened to what I've shared thus far tonight, if I haven't robbed God of his glory with my views, I hope people ain't ready to delete and block me tomorrow or put hands and feet on me simply because of my views. My views were controversial. My views are not accepted by everyone tuning in. But I don't believe my views rob God of his glory. I believe that my views can be wrong because I'm a man. I'm sure something I said was wrong. I'm counting on it. I'm a man. I'm not full of myself. So I didn't forget where we was though. Isaiah 53:8. Chief Uziel brought out a very powerful point. He said, we've always looked at this as the nations speaking. And the nations are saying this about Israel, that, Israel went through this for our cause, so to speak, right? Which I'll say, without even having to say I disagree with it, I'll just look at verse 8 and says, if the nations are saying this, because it can't be one nation saying this, because it says, who has believed our report? So it's more than one. So if the nations are speaking this, when it says, he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people, why is it my people in the singular? And why is here's my grammar now. For those who, he don't know no grammar. Here's my grammar now. Why are we using this personal pronoun to describe all of these different nations? Especially knowing that all of these different nations don't share the same views. Like when the Torah speaks of different nations coming together against Israel, it actually uses a plural term like different nations. It never uses like the singular term, and definitely not a pronoun like my, because it's talking about different nations. So I think even that would be problematic. But even still, I don't have all the answers. That's a damn good point by Brother Chief Uziel. And to be honest, to be fair, I'm on the park on that. I didn't come here to. I'm on the fence on that. Fence, right. I didn't come here today to have an answer for everything that's said.
Right.
Later on, we're gonna have a segment where people can call in. I may not have an answer for everybody because I don't know it all, and that should remind people what the hell is man.
You know what? Let us move on because we do want to have that segment.
Right.
So let me ask the other questions.
And keep it in mind, we supposed to be having a sit down with Divine Prospect, where he can now come in, being a master. I'm gonna call him that. Out of his, in humility, he ain't gonna call himself that, but I'm gonna call him that. Him being a master of New Testament theology and exegesis, he is now gonna be the one who is going to be sitting down with me, but with Chief Uziel conducting the entire interview, and Divine Prospect being able to go back and forth with me about some of the views that I shared tonight. So we're actually purposely holding back from giving everything that I would like to share tonight because we want to have a much bigger dialogue with my brother Divine Prospect.
All right, so let's move on. Next question. What is salvation contingent on and based on? That definition which book holds more weight and or is absolutely sufficient for salvation, not needing any other proof text. Let me repeat it. What is salvation contingent on and based on? That definition which book hold more weight and or is absolutely sufficient for salvation, not needing any other proof text.
All right. Salvation is contingent upon Torah practice and observance, clear cut and simple. The Psalm says in Psalm 119, verse 155 says, salvation is far from the wicked because they keep not my statutes. Here come the super technical Israelites. It didn't say he kept my laws. He just said statutes. He talking about the laws, because when we talk about the laws, what y'all say? Laws, statutes, commandments, right? So right. Let's not play games. Because you know that super technical people are super technical to finagle their way out of areas that they can't find any other way out of.
Right.
Clearly, the psalmist is saying, salvation is far from the wicked because they seek not my Torah. Period. So salvation, as the psalmist is letting you know, is contingent upon practicing Torah. One of the reasons why the identity of the Messiah is not clear, so as to look into the text and say, I know who the Messiah is because if you do that, then you only doing it now because you found out who he is, you know he's real, so now you're going to do it. The text purposely causes great enigma around who the Messiah is, so as to cause us to not be fixated on his identity, to remember what salvation is contingent upon. Regardless of who the Messiah is, even when he come, you being judged not for knowing his name, not for knowing his role, you being judged for how much Torah you practice. The Mashiach is not asking you when he come through, what's my name, Ak? He ain't Eminem, my name is. He's coming through like, you got some commandments?
Right.
You got some Torah behind you?
Right.
What do you have in the bank?
Right.
As they say at the end of days, everybody starts to look for what's in their bank because they know they're going to have to get out of here and have something, right? Well, figuratively speaking, the Mashiach is looking for what's in your bank, Torah-wise. What you got for me? What have you done lately?
Right.
Yeah, I know you was shining here and you was doing that. What you doing now? Are you feeding the poor? Are you taking care of the fatherless, the motherless, the childless, parents that lose children, prevalent today? Are you keeping this Torah? Are you about unity with your brother, regardless of your brother's views, so long as those views don't rob God of his glory? I never read nowhere in the Torah says you can't hate your brother in your heart, but if he ain't doing this, you can hate him though. The Torah simply says you can't hate your brother in your heart. So I have a question. Why do we place so much emphasis on the identity, the name, and knowing who the Messiah is emphatically beyond a shadow of a doubt, when the text itself don't do that? The text itself don't do that. Remember, and I'm going to introduce common sense here. King Cyrus of Persia, his introduction to the world scene was prophesied by Isaiah in Isaiah 45 verse 1. Isaiah is what? 700 BCE. So we're talking about the 8th century BCE. Koresh or Cyrus doesn't come to the 5th century BCE, which is the 400s. Isaiah is 400 to 500 years before King Cyrus. He gives you King Cyrus's land and name and tell you what he gonna do. The Creator couldn't have did that with the Mashiach. He couldn't tell you what year. He couldn't have said 2020. Matter of fact, to touch on the Israelites and what's in the news now, the Creator couldn't have said 2019, because you got Israelites now talking about 2019 is the year. Last time I checked, both Old and New Testament says nobody shall know the day or the hour. Right. So how you figure this calculation out?
Right.
You must know some gematria. What you put me on?
Right.
The text of the Tanakh, the Old Testament says, he shall come like a thief in the night. That means you don't know. Because that's how a thief in the night come, by surprise attack. It ain't timed. He's a thief coming through in the night.
That's right.
The New Testament says, for those who think I don't know the New Testament, not even an angel in heaven knows the day nor hour. That's the New Testament. So why we think we know the calculation of when the Mashiach is coming? But I have a question. God told Isaiah the prophet to tell the people the name of Cyrus, who God called the Mashiach.
Right.
400 to 500 years before Cyrus got here.
Right.
He couldn't have done that with the Messiah to come, the anointed to come? Of course he could. But what would it be the problem with that? Once you know who it is, you checking for him. Mm-hmm. And if you checking for him, you only doing that which is right because you located the person with the belt in their hand. Mm-hmm. If your parents followed you all day, of course you be good because they following your ass all day. But let your parents go off somewhere, you're going to be who you are. Right. When the Creator enacts judgment in the earth, he's coming to weigh you by who you are. So there's an enigma surrounding who the Mashiach is because God want to catch you how you are. End thought on that point.
Right. There we go. Because people are waiting for this. And for the people online, look, we usually don't do this. I usually don't do this. You see the super chat symbol on the bottom with the dollar sign. You know, if you want to ask your questions, do it through super chat. Contribute a little to great things like this. We never ask for anything.
No, never.
Right, we're not like any one of those other platforms, and we kind of come up with technology. You know, software for editing and all that stuff costs money. You know, green screen, live. You don't see too much of that.
No, you don't.
You know, some people just get in front of behind a blank wall. Mm-hmm. We going through the technology or trying to show certain things. I'm not begging for money. I don't really, I don't do that. But just don't give black people the name that we always have.
That's right.
You know what I mean? That we don't help and we don't contribute to each other's thing. All this setup, the lights and all this stuff.
Let me jump in and say this. I've been on Israelite streams on Sarnetta channel. I've been on Sarnetta's YouTube channel, his stream, where I see Israelites donating kesef, money. And them same Israelites come on other Israelite platforms and you don't see nothing go up. So, I mean, when as Chief Uzziah said, have you ever seen us come out and, I need this, I need that. It's always about free. But what people have to understand is that, and I'll bring some of this to the camera so that people can see. I got a car, but I travel with this today. I pay for all this in my pocket. This is the green screen. This is the stand. This is lighting. Y'all can't see, but behind the camera is lighting provided by Chief Uzziah.
Camera.
He has 2 laptops going. And they ain't cheap laptops. This is a MacBook here. And another one is equal to a MacBook. So what we're saying is contributing to platforms like this that are bringing good dialogues, it doesn't help to donate kesef or money to help keep this thing going so that next time we could give it bigger and better. We would love to do a free lecture and bring in hundreds of people. But how would that be possible if we don't have the means to go out and purchase a place and do those things? So if you could find it in your heart, if anything said today was beneficial, if anything said today touched you, whether it was the words of Chief Uziel, the words of myself, or our dialogue together, please help us in some way, shape, or form to build this particular platform that we're on right now.
And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I know sometimes we get caught up in the conversations, but there's a lot of content in this channel also. The Zion Lexx,
Right.
The Zion Lexx YouTube channel, which I know he's going to rip this and he's going to put it on his channel also. And that's how we work. Whenever I do something, he's free to grab it and put it on his channel. But just help us out. You know, I also got the link on the on the descriptions. If you refresh your video, I have the link on the descriptions where you could send your donations through PayPal. So that's just a little something for all of you out there. Hope that I didn't catch you, off guard with that one. But we got to learn to support each other. Here we go. Number 6. What merit, if any at all, is there to the claim that the death of the righteous atones?
What merit, if any at all, is there to the claim that the death of the righteous brings atonement?
Atonement for sin.
Atonement for sin.
For sin, right?
And I would say this: there are rabbinical teachings, or again, we're going into the oral tradition, right? When I say rabbinic teachings, we're talking about the oral tradition. And I've been using this term oral tradition all afternoon. I've introduced the term rabbinic here and there. Let me just put this on the record. The oral tradition precedes European conversion to the Israelite way of life. Let's just be clear on that first. So when I talk about the oral tradition, I hope you're not in your mind thinking of Rabbi Cohen somewhere, or Rabbi Lubavitch, or Rabbi Rosenberg somewhere. We're talking about Jews of color. We're talking about Israelites that look like... Oh, I definitely threw a shot at the Rosenberg dude. That fraud. Right? And I ain't gonna never take my foot off your neck, you fraud. You promised $1 million, over $1 million to the Israelite community during the debate with Polite. You told me that. I even shared it with Brother Chief Uziel. You promised $1 million in funds so that Israelites can go to school in Tel Aviv University for free. You never came through with that. So Harry Rosenberg, I'm never taking my foot off your neck, you damn liar. I thank the Creator that I got over my ego and I left you where you needed to be at the curbside. And I thank the Creator that I kept my heart intention so as to never meet you know what. I want to say it the way I feel it, but I'm in my brother's studio and I don't want to disrespect his food studio, but if on any other time I really say it the way I want to say it, I'm glad I never met you so and so and so and so and so and so. And
you got that off your chest?
I got that off my chest.
Goodness gracious, I didn't mean all that. But can't stop you, so let's go. Answer.
All right, so here's what I want to say. So the oral tradition talks about it, right? And we didn't really get to develop the oral tradition. Be quiet, Siri. We didn't really get to develop oral tradition the way I wanted to, but we'll obviously be able to come back. But here's what I want to say. Shout out to Jeffrey Robinson for donating money. Thank you very much, Aki. We definitely appreciate it. Family, this is what it's all about. Thank you very much. So the oral tradition definitely teaches that the death of the righteous can trigger atonement, and I don't want to say atonement, I want to be clear, can trigger repentance in people. There's a major difference. No one's death can atone for someone's sin. But the death of a righteous person can trigger repentance in a collective body of people connected to that righteous person, meaning they know who he is. And they have to say to himself, put yourself in a space like that. Consider that even though we're not God, think in your mind who you believe might be the most righteous person in our generation. And of course, we could be wrong. But as far as you know that person got more goodly deeds than you. You know that person's heart is more firm and stern with God than you. And you watch God take them out of here. And not just that, you watch God take them out of here violently. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to look and you're going to be like, I better not do that. You go around, spread the word to those who didn't know and those who didn't witness it, and everybody gets the point, and people come back to God. That is the reason behind, and I hate to say this because this is YouTube and they shut your channel down for certain things, so I want to put a disclaimer first. That's the reason why behind public executions in the Middle East. The executioner holds a scimitar sword. The charge is read. He rapes a little girl. He's found convicted. Put his head right here on the chopping block. A big, strong, burly, brusky, brown black man come holding a scimitar and puts it in the air. He shouts, God is great in the Arabic language. I don't need to say it. And then he introduces the scimitar to that person's neck with a clean slice, like you cutting cheese or turkey. And guess what everybody else said who got a thought in their mind of, there's somebody in that audience at some point in their life seen a woman and thought to themselves, I'm going to forcefully have my way with her. When they watched that execution, that thought immediately left their mind. This is the idea behind the oral tradition saying that the death of the righteous can trigger repentance in people, not atonement. But here comes Paul. And this is the part of the conversation that was supposed to get a little deep for my Messianic brothers. Here comes Paul, who said he's a Pharisee. A Pharisee is a doctor of the law. But more importantly, you can't call yourself a Pharisee and don't accept the oral tradition. Let's go a step further. The book of Acts, chapter 22, I believe, says that Paul's teacher is Ramban Gamliel. For those who don't know who Ramban Gamliel is, let's just first be clear. He's the only one called Rabban. You usually call the rabbi or even Rav. Rabbi Gamliel is the first to be called Rabban as a title of distinguishment. That's number one. Number two, Gamliel is the grandson of Hillel the elder. Why should that mean anything to you? Well, if you observe Israelite holy days and you keep it during the season that we all keep it, you're following what's called the Hillel calendar.
Right.
Gamliel is Hillel's grandson. Let's take it a step further. Who is Gamliel's great-grandson? Yehuda HaNasi, the compiler, codifier, and redactor of the Mishnah, which is the foundation of the oral law. The Talmud acts as a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah represents all 613 laws being spoken about, expounded upon by sages of many generations. And mainly sages who got their interpretations directly via mouth of their teacher before them, ultimately going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. That is what we believe firmly, those who follow the oral tradition. So the person who goes on to codify, or I guess in today's language, to write the Mishnah, is Gamliel's great-grandson, Yehuda HaNasi. That means Paul was taught by the guy whose descendant wrote the oral law, so to speak. That means Paul was somebody heavily steeped in what? The oral tradition. But we're going to take it a step further, because I know a lot of people in the Messianic community deny the oral tradition. But here's the thing. If you've been paying attention to anything I've been saying throughout the course of this dialogue, you would first consider this. The oral tradition is on record before you have a New Testament. The oral tradition is on record speaking about the idea of a suffering servant being, quote unquote, the Messiah, said long before there was a New Testament. That means the template of the Messiah of the Messiah of the New Testament is based on the template of the Messiah in the oral tradition. So all the Messianic brothers and sisters walking around saying that Talmud is the Jewish man, it's the devil, the Mishnah, all that is garbage. Your entire basis of how the Messianic is conceived is based on the oral tradition that preceded it. Because I can show you and give you by name all the teachers of the oral tradition that precede Paul, that precede Matthew, that precede the entire New Testament by no less than 300 years, that are saying the exact same thing that we find in the New Testament concerning the Messiah, which means, as I stated earlier this week, the New Testament's model of the Mashiach is actually correlated, but more importantly, based on the oral tradition. So I'm now trying to open up the Messianics to something that they've missed and overlooked. Because Messianics say, oh, we don't mess with the oral tradition. Because with the oral tradition comes a lot of things. It comes all that, the oral explanations that we can't find in the text. And it comes with gematria. I understand why Chief Uziel and the community I come from would have a problem with gematria, but I'm trying to really figure out and wrap my mind around why Messianics who follow the New Testament would have a problem with gematria. Doesn't the book of Revelation say that the number of the beast is a number of a man?
That's what it
and
says.
that number is 636?
Yeah.
And when you listen to every Messianic teacher break down who that beast is or who that man is, they tell you, well, when you look at Roman numerals, his name adds up to 666. You know that's gematria, right?
Right. Absolutely.
We just giving y'all teas and stuff. When I sit down with Devon, it's going to get real nice. Let's move on.
And I think that the internet is I'm trying to wait for it to speed up again because it's streaming kind of slow. You see how we moving back again?
Yeah.
I think it's lagging a little, and my son abandoned us.
We're going to do a part 2, by the way.
Yeah, because the people are really into this one.
We're
still holding up over 100 and I think almost 20-some people.
We're going to definitely do a part 2 because we still didn't even get into me really getting into...
Oh, it's back on good now.
...who the Messiah is in terms of his role as a suffering servant. Isaiah 53 isn't even the tip of the iceberg of what I wanted to bring out.
Right.
So there definitely got to be a part 2 to this. So maybe we could segue into some of the questions coming in.
But Gwendolyn Lewis, thank you for your donation. We appreciate it. Gwendolyn, our sister.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget, I also have a link for PayPal under the description. So if you want to donate that way, we truly appreciate it. That last question, you want to leave it for the next time, or do you want me to?
What's the last question?
The last question is, what are your closing thoughts, and what do you think about you spoke about the Apostle Paul.
Well, let me touch on that.
Right.
So the last question essentially is, and we skipped parts of other questions just because it's been a lot of time.
Right.
So we definitely doing a part 2. And again, I've been holding back because I really want to have this conversation with Divine Prospect present, who I believe is one of the foremost, he's not the only one, but one of the foremost teachers in the Messianic community, who I think would be able to take this conversation to a different direction because of his vast knowledge of the New Testament, but more importantly, the canonical text and how it's presented. So let me say this in closing. One of the reasons why I decided to have this dialogue today publicly is because I wanted to show that when Messianics argue tooth and nail with non-Messianics, the community that I come from, and say that the Mashiach is supposed to suffer, what are you, slow? You never read Isaiah 53? They're not bugging. When our ancestors, and this is the most important part, when our ancestors, who, by the way, the very first followers of this insight that is called today Christianity, but because I know the Messianic community is against the term Christianity, because a lot of the things that come with Christianity they reject, such as earlier you discussed, the implications of some of my views and what would it have to do with the virgin birth. Me acknowledging that the suffering servant as a model in the New Testament is born out of the oral tradition has nothing to do with my thoughts on a virgin birth. A virgin birth never existed, didn't exist, and in fact, a great majority of the Messianic community agrees with me on that and says that. And that was news to us and to me when we encountered that, because we thought that they accepted all elements of their book as presented. Right. It's in the New Testament, so we thought they accepted it, not realizing that some of them are very good, and I got to give credit where credit is due, critical researchers. And they came to a point where they said, in my critical research, I know it's in the book, but I disagree with it. But then our backlash is, you have to admit this then. God is not the author of confusion. So if we have inconsistencies within our text, if you could look into the text of the New Testament and say the virgin birth, although it's in there, it's false, but yeah, it's in there, then you have to admit your book is not divinely inspired. It can only be said to be divinely inspired if it is without error. Because I don't believe God makes mistakes. Because even as New Testament says, God is not the author of confusion. So in closing, I came to show that in order for our ancient ancestors, who were the first quote-unquote Christians, to accept these stories, don't you think they had to be going on something? You really just think they was just stupid and they didn't know better? There had to be a tradition that they were drawing from that made these stories palatable and acceptable. They didn't just wake up one day and say, yeah, you're right, the Messiah is supposed to suffer. There had to be a tradition, of which I'm pointing out to you today, that they were able to draw from, see correlation in, and then be able to say, okay, and then now I believe that this figure aligns with it. So the model is correct, in my opinion. I believe the model is correct. And in my next sit down, I'll bring all of my proof texts in the Torah for why I believe the New Testament's model of the Mashiach is correct. But saying that the model is correct and saying who they think it is correct is two different things.
Okay.
And I would like to say this in closing. I have an issue with Paul, as many of my New Testament brothers reached out to me and told me. I won't name names to say, oh, why'd you tell them that? You causing division. I don't want to do that. But many Messianics reached out to me to say that they got issues with Paul. And to be fair and objective, many Messianics publicly went on my page and say, I don't got an issue with Paul. In fact, you could go to 2 Peter's and see it written that people who have issues with Paul is wicked. Like they got issues, like they can't understand what Paul is saying, they're wicked. But I want to say this to those brothers in the most humble way I can find. You do understand that discernment of what a person is saying is incumbent upon the person who's saying it. Let me say it again. You do understand that discernment of what a person is saying is incumbent upon the person saying it. So, I'm a parent, you're a parent. When I go to school and I realize my child is failing, and I get to talk to parents who are waiting on the same line as me, and all of our children is failing, all our children ain't stupid, and all our children ain't misbehaving, there's a teacher here who ain't doing good teaching. So we can't blame the people and even go a step further and say, if you don't believe, understand what the teacher is saying, we don't check the children, we check the teacher.
Right.
Paul is the one that comes in and introduces the Trinity. Something that, as far as I know, all Messianics that I've encountered in the Israelite community deny.
Right.
I have a lot to say about Paul during my next sit down. And I think a lot of what I got to say is going to drop some jaws. But the most important thing that I want to say as a message to both Old Testament Israelites and New Testament Israelites in clothing is this. Yeah, we're going to have differences in view. Yes, some of the differences may cause emotions to fly. But you shouldn't hate your brother because he has a different view than you. That's number one. And number two, our different views should never cause us to be at odds to the point where it could be a bloodbath or bloodshed. That's crazy. When all communities remember what salvation is contingent upon, there would never ever be another instance of disrespect. When you understand that salvation is contingent upon what is written in the New Testament, this sounds crazy to anybody on the Old Testament side. When you understand that salvation is contingent upon what is written in the New Testament, when Yeshua says, I have not come to do away with the law, not one dotting of the I, no crossing the T shall be diminished. He says, Moses sits in the scribes and Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. Therefore, whatever they tell you, that you shall do, but
That's
after their doings, you shall not do. What is that saying? Number one, the Pharisees accept the oral tradition. We have a record in the New Testament where Yeshua, Yahushua, or Jesus, is telling his followers in Matthew, whatever the scribes and Pharisees tell you, that you shall do. Keeping in mind, the Pharisees follow the oral tradition. The scribes also follow the oral tradition. That means he's actually telling you, or he's giving credence to what? The oral tradition, which makes sense to me because they called him rabbi. You can't even find the word rabbi in the Old Testament.
No, you can't.
That's a post-Second Temple term. That term existed among the term when the idea of an oral tradition is flourishing. In fact, where you encounter the term rabbi the most are among those who practice and follow the oral tradition. Paul calls himself openly a Pharisee in the book of Acts. He's called a Pharisee. They've even said Ramban Gamliel, who's the grandson of Hillel, and his great-grandson goes on to write the Mishnah, which later is commented on in the Talmud. So I don't understand how Messianics reject this when Yeshua is on record saying,
to follow
whatever the Pharisees and the scribes teach you, that you shall do. So what is he condemning? He's saying, whatever they teach you, do. That means he puts respect on what they know and teach.
Right.
That means he doesn't have a problem with what they teach. But he goes on to say, but after their doings shall you not do. So what is he saying? It's the same thing that exists today. We got a lot of great speakers in Israel. Some of them is your favorite speakers. Some of them you know. Not everybody's doing what they're saying. I'll end right there.
Thank you, my brother. we got quite a few people that let me clear this out and start this up. It's been a long discussion, and I believe that we got up to 120 something. So thank you to all the people that donated. We hope that you continue to donate. I thank my brother Chief Avdia for taking the time out to come out here and be able to discuss this topic. And like I said, some of the things that he's discussing, we rock a lot, but a lot of the things he didn't make them known until this time. So I'm going to say this. If you have any questions, inbox him. Wait till you see him. Speak to him. And at this moment, I'm going to open up the phone. Now, I'm kind of leery.
That's the number, y'all.
To give this number out for you guys to call in. But I'm expecting that the people who are going to call in
follow Torah
and are going to be decent people, right? People that have morals and respect and not going to call in cursing. If you have a question, if you have a problem with anything that was said, this is your opportunity. I'm gonna take about how many questions you want to take?
It's up to you because I'm in your studio, so it's up to you. You call it. I don't care.
You got time to burn?
I got time to burn.
All right, so we'll see. All right. So that number is 347-622-9090. You could call in with your questions right now, and it's going to go crazy as soon as I put this number up there.
Let me tell you how the first question is going to start. Shalom, Chief. I hear you, but that dude right there?
I don't think so. I think the people that are on are going to, and we could do more lessons like this, because, when we have time like this, it will replace your Sunday school.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Facts.
We can have lessons like this all the time. This is in our hearts. This is what we do. It's in our hearts. So it's not like I said, we don't get paid for this. We never ask money for this, but just because of the dialogue and taking time off, the equipment and all the stuff that we put the effort and time into, that, we ask for a little donation today. And we thank Jeffrey Robinson. We thank Gwendolyn Lewis and everybody else who has donated to us. We really appreciate it, and may the Most High God bless you. So very, very deep discussion. I'm sure that on my end and the people that I rock with, there's going to be, here we go, from Detroit, Michigan. We getting a call from Detroit, Michigan. Give me 1 second here.
Ask him where his bed at.
Shalom, shalom. Who am I speaking to?
Shalom, shalom. This is Ema Shara.
Shalom, Ema. How are you?
I'm good, praise Most High. How are you both?
I'm great.
Shalom, shalom, Ema.
I enjoyed that, but you know, I do have a question, of course, and I believe I understand you to have said the same thing that I've always been thinking, and that is that you're Messianic because you believe in a Messiah to come, period, not that you agree completely with those brothers who incorrectly refer to themselves as Messianic. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes and no. When I call myself a Messianic, you are right in that it doesn't mean that I agree with everything they teach. But the reason why I'm opting and choosing to redefine myself and call myself a Messianic is because I am now in acceptance of the model of the Messiah as conveyed in the New Testament, with some subtle nuances and differences that I do not believe is consistent with the oral tradition it came from. But because I accept the model of the oral traditions Messiah that I can see echoed in the New Testament, yes, I do call myself Messianic.
Has this model come already or not?
Has the Messiah come already? No.
The model that you just spoke of in the New Testament, has that person been here already?
Absolutely not. Excellent
Thank
question.
you. Okay, then we agree. That we got it. We on point right there.
All right.
I have that understanding. Toda.
You're very welcome. Thank you for calling.
Thank you, Ema.
Toda.
There you go. The number is 347-622. Someone asked online, Deuteronomy 21:10. If he takes for himself another wife, her food, her rent, garment, and her duty, I don't know what this has to do with it.
So let's just be clear. That came via text.
It's right here. Deuteronomy 21:10.
All right. So
Ariel, thank you for your donation.
thank you very much, Moray Ariel, my brother. Thank you very much. Unless the questions are related to what we discussed, we're not going to be answering, or at least I'm not going to be answering any other question unless it's related to what we discussed, just simply because we want to give enough people time to call in to deal with what we discussed. Not to disrespect anybody's question. Nobody's question is irrelevant, but we want to deal with what was discussed. Now, if we can continue with our people's participation to come on this platform again and do something else, then yeah, it's a free-for-all. We could do a freestyle session.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you said the model that you follow, from Brooklyn, that's a local. Shalom, shalom, and who am I speaking to?
This is James Eugene from Brooklyn.
Hey, how you doing, James?
Good. How's everything?
Everything is good.
I just want to say hi to you, Uzziah and Zion Lexx. And I have a question. I was wondering, with all the controversy surrounding the New Testament, why do you think it was created? Why was it created? Was it created to throw us off, or perhaps it's a test given by the Most High to see who's going to seek the book, like read the book with diligence? Why was it created?
All right, that's a good question. First of all, shalom, brother. Obviously, we know each other. I know you. You know me. Shalom.
Yes, definitely.
Let me say this. That's a twofold answer that I'm gonna give, because I want to be fair. I think there's a combination of two reasons why the New Testament came into formation. first tell what I believe is a sincere reason. I believe that the formation of the New Testament were those who lived during a time period that wanted to document certain events that took place. I don't believe that the text is without error. I also don't believe that the text is without embellishment. I believe that there are various personalities in the Messianic community that have openly went on record to say that there are embellishments and there are also errors. For instance, obviously the virgin birth is an error or an embellishment because it just never existed. So there's that aspect. But then there's a second aspect which I think is insincere, which I think is the real point of my contention that I continue to have with the New Testament. Paul of Tarsus, and that name Tarsus is highly significant for many reasons. I'll get super technical with it when I sit down with Divine Prospect. But Paul of Tarsus, first and foremost, in the New Testament is introduced not as a student of Ramban Gamliel. He's first introduced as an agent of Rome. I'm not adding to the text. I'm not saying nothing that's not there. I'm actually quoting verbatim. Paul was an agent of Rome. He worked for Rome, the government of Rome. He was a Roman enforcer, a Roman soldier. Notwithstanding the fact that he's, according to the text, of the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Roman agent, an agent of Rome. Now I have a common sense question, and I bring it into modern day. Without mentioning the names, I think everybody knows who I'm talking about, and it's no disrespect to this individual or any other individual like them, but for the sake of being real, there's a couple individuals in the Israelite community that are former police officers and detectives. Mm-hmm. Because of that, there's people that seek to use their jobs to destroy their character and their following. Oh, how can we trust you? You used to be a cop. You probably still working with them. You an agent. Oh, I don't mess with so-and-so from, what's that camp that had that recent demonstration? They usually wear purple. IUIC. Nate. Nate is a former detective and cop. Because of that revelation, people brought out that, because he's I'm going to put you on hold so somebody can get paused on, or however you want to do it, Chief.
Nah,
let's finish out.
Yeah, let's.
Whoever's calling, call back within another minute or so. We're almost going to wrap it up. But in today's language, someone who works for an enforcing agency that is noted to be against our people, we don't trust them, right or wrong.
Right.
So that's the reason why Nate from IUIC catches hell. I personally don't agree with that.
Right.
We have former police officers.
And I don't agree with that.
Right. We got former
we got police officers.
We got former and current officers in our community. We got people that, went to college and, got what we would call today good jobs. We got brothers in the Israelite community today. Shout out to my brother. I'm going to put your name on record. I hope you're not offended. Shout out to my brother, Chief Meku, who's a police officer here in New York City. But he's one of those police officers that will make sure that on his watch, ain't going to be no violating our brothers and sisters. And he has a track record of doing that. And he gets on the beamer and speaks about it publicly that he doesn't allow that. And we need more of that. We need more of our people to be part of the solution. Everybody's talking about the problem. How many people are willing to get in the trenches and be part of the solution? So we need more brothers and sisters with that power, with that authority to be in those places so that certain things don't go down. So I don't agree with that, but I will point that out to say this. Oh, what a hypocrisy it is for many in the Messianic community to attack people like Nate from IUIC and call him an agent when the book is very clear that Paul was an agent of Rome. And they say that they don't trust Nate because as someone who formerly worked here, how do we know what was the contents of your release? When they released you, they released you under what? Under what guise? Under what intents and purposes? Right. Are you still working for them or not? So I asked an obvious question. Was Paul still working for Rome? So there's two ways that could go. No disrespect intended to anybody.
Yeah. Thanks for answering my question.
No problem, my brother. Shalom.
Shalom.
So what's your view on the Apocalyptic era and the book of Revelation?
I believe that Revelation is not sufficient as a book of prophetic calling, because a great deal of Revelation is quoting the books of Daniel and Zechariah. So,
True.
I mean, what new revelation are we really finding except for a couple of very striking and daring revelations that we can't find in the Old Testament, such as, the opening of the seals, the blowing of the horns and the trumpets. We don't find all of that there. And mind you, when it comes to eschatological literature, you may not find someone or too many more people as immersed as people like myself. So I know that area very well, and I'm familiar with that language, and that language belongs to people who usually follow Kabbalah. So when a person opens the book of Revelations that understands how Kabbalistic literature works and how Kabbalistic methodology and doctrine works, and you open the book of Revelations, you're opening something you're all too familiar with. So I just have a problem with certain people in the Messianic community that reject the oral tradition and reject Kabbalistic teachings and reject these things, but we know that Yeshua or Yahushua came from the community of the Essenes. Looking at the book of Revelations, me as a person that understands the Kabbalistic tradition like the back of my hand, I can tell you it's very familiar literature. Especially when we're talking about the seals that are open. Like I could actually give you some of the Kabbalistic literature that talked about it way before it was written and penned in the New Testament. So I don't really put too much emphasis on the New Testament revelations because I already understand the source of those works.
Our next call is from Chicago, Illinois. Who am I speaking to?
Shalom, this is Monica.
Shalom, Monica. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for just using this platform. This is my first time tuning in on your page. And I just wanted to thank you, Zion Lexx. I thoroughly enjoyed just tuning in. Your wisdom is profound. And I'll make this really short, as this is something that I've had lots of discussions with amongst different Israelites, and it is around Psalms 110. I'm not sure if you guys want to pull it up or if you want me to read.
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay. So Psalms 10, it reads, "The Lord says to my Lord," and I read it in different versions, but it says, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool." And I guess the debate is around the first line, "The Lord says unto my Lord." And even when you Google it, the meaning of what Psalms 101, even the Google interpretation, it gives you, I think I screenshotted it for the sake of this conversation. It even would read, it would narrate it as, this is, I want to give you what Google says. "This psalm is a cornerstone in Christian theology, as it is cited as proof of the plurality of the Godhead and Jesus' supremacy as King, Priest, and Messiah." So I guess, the question is, who is this so-called little Lord, or this lesser, I've heard people say this lesser Yahuwah that David is speaking of?
That's a great question. Let me say this to you by by letting you know that I actually addressed this on my Facebook page, and I'm going to tag you in it.
Okay.
I do know you. We're friends on Facebook. We've actually had conversations on the text, and I thank you for those conversations as well. Let me say this. There's two ways that a Psalm of David begins. A Psalm of David begins by saying, Mizmor le David, which means a Psalm of David, or Le David Mizmor, which means of David a psalm. There's a reason behind that. That wasn't just like haphazard that one writer decided to write of David a psalm and another writer decided to write a psalm by David. There's a reason. Many of the prophets, when speaking under the Holy Spirit or in a prophetic estate, they speak of themselves in the third person. For those who study the book of Deuteronomy, and you're familiar with the rest of the 4 books of the Torah, which we know are all written by Moses, you realize that of all 5 books of Moses, the book of Deuteronomy is the only book where when Moses speaks, the entire time he's speaking of himself in the third person. Why? This is also a point in Moses' life where he reaches the highest state of his spiritual God consciousness. When a person is having a prophetic dream, a prophetic vision, what is happening and occurring to them is an experience that no one who has never experienced that could ever describe. It's an experience where you feel as if you are literally outside of yourself. Hence, many of the prophets, when speaking prophetically or under prophetic inspiration, speak of themselves in the third person, but more than me giving you some, jump together explanation that I'm pulling out of a hat, I'm going to show you in the text why what I'm saying is true.
Okay.
By quoting what I wrote on Facebook. Whenever a psalm begins with a song of David, this means that David was not under the Holy Spirit. While when a psalm begins with of David a song, this means that David was speaking under prophetic influence. The psalm in question, Psalms 110, it actually begins like that. Le David Mizmor, of David a psalm, which means David was speaking in a prophetic sense. To prove to you that even the New Testament authorities agree that when David wrote this psalm, he was speaking in the Spirit, let's go to Matthew 22, verse 43, where it says explicitly, David spoke, and I put in quotations, in the Spirit. So even the writers of Matthew 22:43 agree that when David wrote this psalm, he was speaking in the Spirit. And when we speak of in the Spirit, in Hebrew it's called Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Holy Spirit. And it usually means a person is speaking under prophetic influence. The New Testament writers agree, Psalm 110:1, David is speaking in the Spirit. That's Matthew 22:43. Now let me prove to you why it's David. The reason why we know it's David is simple. Open up the book of 1 Kings, chapter 5, verse 17, where King Solomon is speaking. King Solomon is speaking, and he's given an explanation for why he built the temple versus his father David. And he says, and I quote, "You knew that my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord until the Lord had subdued his enemies under his feet." The very same thing that Psalms 110:1 says. The Lord spoke unto the Lord, saying, "Sit on my right hand until I make my enemies, your enemies, a stool for your feet." We know that this is King David speaking about himself in the Spirit, as both the New Testament says and the Old Testament authorities agree. David is speaking in the Spirit. The reason why we know David is speaking, King Solomon brings it home in 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 17, when he says, "You knew that my father David could not build a house for the name of the Lord until the Lord has subdued his," meaning David's, "enemies under his feet."
Thank you.
To further prove the point.
Right on point.
All right, sis.
All right, thank you, Sister Monica. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, shalom.
Shalom.
All right, I see I got Leader for Christ shaking her head online. I don't know exactly why you're shaking your head. The number is 347-622-9090, 347-622-9090. For anyone that would like to call in. I mean, we're almost wrapping up. Maybe I'll take like 2 more questions. If anyone else is. Oh, thank you to Southern Son for your donation. Also remember that you could donate on our on PayPal. On PayPal. Okay? To everybody out there, you could donate on PayPal. Help us to have more things like this, to buy more equipment, to make things happen. We put out a lot of our own to build up our platforms, and it's not easy because new equipment comes out all the time. You gotta kind of get new computer, new technology, let things be running. So we appreciate everything that you guys do. Shaking my head, nah, not on point. It's okay, Leader. We still love you, sis.
No disrespect. No disrespect.
No disrespect. So, I guess if that's it, if no one else is going to call in, Torah, it was a great bill, my brother.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if people understand what took place here, although we share more views in common, certainly not today. Right. But we're able to end our dialogue to agree to disagree and appreciate each other's views. And hopefully what we're doing is serving as a template for how to have discussions like this.
Right.
We don't agree on this subject a lot. There's a lot of points I made today that we don't share in common. But did it tarnish our relationship?
No.
Does it tarnish the way that we view each other? No. That's simply your opinion, which everyone's entitled to, and no opinion shared, as far as I believe, rob God of his glory. So I still have great respect for my brother, and I pray daily I have the same.
And I understood what you were trying to say, that the model for the New Testament, and you never hid the fact that you follow oral tradition.
Right, never hid that.
You, from off the gate, right. I mean, from what I've known
our first interview.
Yeah, it was, you follow oral tradition. And everybody that knows you from our community know that you follow that.
Right.
And I believe that what you're saying is that the New Testament model of the Messiah is from oral tradition.
That's right.
Which some of us may accept or may not accept.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that's fine. You know what I mean? And the brother laid out his points. And what he's really, if you really listening to what he said, is for those brothers and sisters that are quote unquote on the Messianic side, for lack of a better word, right? From what we know, New Testament Israelites. Now you have to go back and look at yourself, because some of you have always denied oral tradition. But now if your whole model of, or everything that was based on the Messiah, or most of the things that were based of the Messiah come from the oral tradition, now this is something that you have to look into.
I'll give you one example of what we're talking about for people that are not convinced. Why does the New Testament say that Jesus' ministry began in Galilee? Did they just pull that out of a hat somewhere? Did that truly happen? Where did this come from? There's an oral tradition that says the Mashiach will first appear in Galilee before he goes anywhere. Before going to where that oral tradition is, let me first say this. In the text of the Tanakh in the book of 2 Kings, it tells you that the Assyrian captivity began with Israelites that were taken out of one of the cities. The chief city was Galilee. So the oral tradition says the Messiah will appear at the very point where the captivity began. We always talk about the captivity that began in 70 AD. We forget that the captivity really began, as far as Israelites being forced out of the land, with the Assyrian captivity. That was the first Israelites kicked out and displaced from Israel, the Assyrian captivity.
Right.
And the Assyrian captivity commenced in Galilee. That's in the book of 2 Kings. So the oral tradition says the Messiah will appear in the place where the captivity began. Right. So it's by no coincidence that the New Testament authors begin Jesus' ministry in Galilee, knowing this is what the oral tradition already says and has on record. In the book of the Zohar, Bereshit, I'm giving you quotations. You could pull it up online as we speak. Bereshit 1:15a in the Zohar, it says, the Mashiach shall appear in the land of Galilee. I even shared it on my Facebook page earlier this week with a screenshot with my finger pointing on it, highlighted in yellow. It's right there. This came from Rabbi Yochanan Zaki, who says he got the tradition from Hillel. Hillel is no less than 2 centuries before the New Testament was written, no less than 2 centuries before anybody in the New Testament was even living. And he's on record saying that the Mashiach will first appear in the Galilee. That means the oral tradition is already saying what the New Testament writers later put into the text.
If somebody has a question they want to call in. 347-622-9090. 347-622-9090. And this will be the last question I'll be taking. That way we could you know, me and the brother both got lives. We got regular lives. Now, if we could do this on a regular basis, on a Yom Rishon or on another day,
we'll try.
And we'll try and you know and we'll do it. You know, we'll do it if the brother has time, if I have time, and the topic don't always have to be this controversial.
That's right.
And Shalom, you're on live with Chief Uziel and Zion Lexx. Do you have a question?
Somebody on?
Yeah.
All right.
So, all right. So it seems like that's where it's going to be.
Part 2 will be with Divine Prospect. There will be a date to be announced. Chief Uziel will be, I don't want to say moderating it because it's not a debate. It is still an interview. Me and Divine Prospect are not having a debate on it, not unless the brother feels that something I said is causing contention.
Or it might be a brother that steps up that from our community that might have issues with some of the things that you say.
Right.
And might want to come and sit down and speak to you.
Right.
And might want to question some of the things that you say. It could come from either side, you know.
Exactly.
These type of discussions are not closed to anyone. I'm going to go back and look at this, and I have to be honest. I don't study oral tradition, so for me to argue something with you that I don't know will be asinine. I just don't study oral tradition, and that is what it is. But as far as everything else, you know,
I mean, we missed a lot. I mean, one of the highlights that I wanted to discuss today, the Messianic community is all too familiar with, even though it's based in the Old Testament, is the 4 craftsmen. Mm-hmm. The 4 craftsmen in the book of, in the Old Testament Tanakh, it would be, what's the prophet with the Z? Zechariah chapter 2, where it shows us 4 horns that would displace and chastise Israel. Then it shows us 4 craftsmen who would come to deal with those horns.
Right.
I wanted to touch on that. This is there's so much more when it comes to this topic that is really going to be at the least bit refreshing, I would say. Because again, I want to say it the way I say it, but because I'm in Chief Uziel's studio, I can't. But listen, I ain't nobody. You know, we give a person their flowers when they can smell it, but remember that glory goes to God. You know, I could be wrong, and I believe I didn't say everything perfect tonight either.
Right. And what's going to happen, a lot of people are going to watch this on Shabbat as they Shabbat ritual.
Right.
So we want to keep it clean anyway.
Right. That too.
So to everyone out there, shalom. May the Most High God bless you all. Giving glory to the Creator of heaven and earth, Yehovah, and which I forgot to do at the beginning, which has been on my mind. So giving glory to the Creator of heaven and earth, Yehovah, and that's the Lord of hosts. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel before you get on.
You gotta share the video. If we had over 100 people in the room today, there should be over 100 shares, especially if you think something that you heard tonight was significant for growth.
And something for a change. You only got 1 thumbs down.
So far.
And don't forget to you could hit the super chat button, donate to our effort. Also, there's a PayPal link on the description. That's for future references. If you didn't catch this live, you could donate that way. We appreciate all of your donations, everyone that tuned in today. We truly appreciate you. May the Most High God bless you all. Shalom, shalom. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Divine liked it.
That's great.
He really liked it.
Hold on for a second.
I'm sure he liked it. I agree with the model. And he probably disagrees with some aspects